they'll typically leave one zipper just unzipped a little bit when they're not pressurized. They'll still have cool air flowing through. In fact, they'll do what's called a soup purge just before we do the deorbit burn. So at the same time, they flush the cabin atmosphere itself with some cool down air. They'll flow some cooled air through the suits just to help regulate the temperature, the cooling effect inside the capsule, just to make sure the environment stays at a comfortable temperature for them, while the Dragon capsule itself heats up to about 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit outside. So we got about a minute left in this suit leak check. We'll wait for the results on that, and we'll just be one more box checked on our way to the upcoming trunk step, deorbit burn, re-entry, and splashdown. And one interesting thing to note, if you're watching this ground track, you're going to start to see that line coming out of the bottom left corner and ending in the Gulf. That means we are on our final orbit. And so Dragon's basically on its last lap around planet Earth. The last 90 minutes it's going to spend until we just about get to that splashdown. So you can keep an eye on that. The line's going to stop moving where you can see it terminate in the Gulf.
Dragon SpaceX, we show nominal leak check.
Copy, show the same.
So there a minute ago, we had confirmation of nominal leak check. Again, that's just checking another box off on the to-do list as Bob and Doug continue their return home back to planet Earth. Up next, we will be making sure that the nitrox system is safe and that we're able to proceed into the next phases of our descent to the Gulf of Mexico. We are aiming for a splashdown site just off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. Right now, our recovery ship is en route to that designated location zone, and it will be there ready and waiting for Bob and Doug to splash down. There on your screen, we do have a live shot from Go Navigator. Again, that's our recovery ship located in the Gulf of Mexico. You can get a little bit of a feel for that wave action that we got there. Generally speaking, pretty calm looking based on the waves that we can see there in the shot. And yeah, so we're excited to be able to welcome Bob and Doug back home. Just checking my timeline quickly. Their landing will be coming up in just under 2 hours. We're looking at an hour and 57 minutes. That will be happening at 11:48 a.m. Pacific time, 18:48 Universal Coordinated Time. Before we get to their water landing, we have to perform a couple of steps prior to that. If you've been following along with us this morning, you're probably very familiar with this. But for perhaps those of you who have joined in within the last few minutes, at this point, we are exactly an hour away from the next physical milestone that needs to be completed prior to Dragon Endeavour's return to planet Earth. Those activities will begin with claw separation. The claw is what connects the umbilicals, the power, the telemetry, the fluids between the Dragon capsule and its trunk. In order to expose the heat shield in preparation for Dragon's re-entry through the atmosphere, we need to jettison the trunk. It will disintegrate upon entering the Earth's atmosphere itself. So once we separate that, we're now able to step into what's called slew to deorbit burn attitude. That's essentially maneuvering the capsule into position to perform the deorbit burn. The deorbit burn is where we fire the 4 Draco thrusters that are located at the top of the capsule near the forward hatch. We call those the forward bulkhead Draco thrusters. Those will be utilized to perform the deorbit burn. It'll last about 11.5 minutes. That deorbit burn is what will be placing Dragon in its final trajectory to the exact landing location. So like I said, that'll be about 11.5 minutes long. After that burn completes, we want to close the nose cone and lock it up. Like I said, that's where the forward hatch is located. And since these capsules are designed to be reusable, we definitely want to protect those thrusters and that hatch, because that is the hatch where the astronauts basically exit and enter the capsule when they're going in and out of the International Space Station. So once we have that nose cone locked and in place, we then enter, we begin to enter the Earth's atmosphere.
And SpaceX for deorbit burn brief.
Go ahead.
Okay, first off, for timing, I'm showing no changes. Your tablet and onboard times on your timeline are within about 1 minute or less of our ground estimates. How copy?
Copy. Timing on board is per the iPads and within a minute.
And even better, the onboard countdown in your timeline should be within a few seconds. So looking pretty good. For the vehicle, Endeavour is looking great for entry. The ready comm during Bomb's comm check earlier, we consider temporary, and we are not tracking any system issues. How copy?
Endeavour's in good shape and good comm from the PLT.
Okay, as far as recovery goes, Go Navigator is just about at the in position, so within a few kilometers. In addition, the WB is airborne. Recovery team is go at this time.
Go for recovery. Copy all.
Yep, and one quick go back. Recovery has arrived, so they are on station. In addition, for the weather, I'm looking at the weather right now from the water video from Go Navigator, and it looks like glass. It's awesome. The latest splashdown forecast, though, is winds at 2.25 knots, wave height less than a foot, and a 6-second period. How copy?
Copy. Winds, waves, and weather.
All right, so there we heard the deorbit briefing. This is basically the opportunity that the core here.
Okay, Doug, that's all we got for the burn brief. We'll talk to you shortly before deorbit sequence start.
Copy all. Thanks, Mike.
And correction there, we'll have the go, no go for you shortly. That'll be the next step.
Okay.
Yeah, so as I was saying, the burn briefing there, just making sure that everyone's on the same page. Since Bob and Doug's primary role during re-entry is to monitor telemetry, timing, and data, it is important to make sure that their onboard timers, or basically time listings, are synced with the most recent trajectory simulations that we've generated here in mission control. So that's what that was, just making sure that their sequence of events was lining up with the with what we're seeing down here in mission control. So all really good stuff there. We also heard that the recovery vessel Go Navigator is in position. So it is ready and waiting for splashdown, which, like I said before, will be occurring at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:48 Universal, and we're just under 2 hours from that happening. So I don't know about you, Dan, but as we're stepping into these checks and you know, we did the leak check, we have done a couple of comm checks, and now we're talking about deorbit burn. My heart's starting to go. We're getting there.
It's starting to feel real. We're waking back up.
Yeah.
It's time to bring these guys home. And I mean, here in the core call up, the water looks like glass from those ship views. That's exactly the type of thing we want to hear. The wind has picked up a tiny bit to 2.25 knots. It's about 2.6, a little under 2.6 miles per hour. So still well within our margins for what we were looking for acceptable splashdown weather. Right now in the room behind us and over in Mission Control Houston, teams are just doing a final go, no go. And so that should wrap up over the next couple of minutes. And then we'll hear them call that up to the crew members when they get the final go to do the deorbit burn. But we'll be doing all of the other activities prior to that, including the claw and trunk separation, and then just getting ourselves ready for deorbit burn. So things are definitely going to start picking up in the next couple of minutes. Really, the next hour is really where things start to happen. But we do have a couple of moments now to get joined by a special guest.
Dragon, SpaceX is go for the deorbit burn, and the burn has been enabled.
That's a great call to hear.
Never copy, go for the deorbit burn, and we see it on board.
All right, so we just heard it. That means both the SpaceX and NASA teams are go for deorbit burn. So we are counting down to that deorbit burn. Still a bit of a ways off. It's just under an hour from now from starting for that 11.5-minute burn. But for now, as we are go for deorbit and return of Bob and Doug, we're going to send it over to the Johnson Space Center real quick, where Courtney Beasley is standing by in Mission Control Houston, along with NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine, also there in Houston. Courtney?
Thanks, Dan. Yes, joining me in a studio here at NASA's Johnson Space Center is NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine. Jim, thanks for joining us today. Another historic day for our agency, returning humans to Earth in a commercially built and operated spacecraft. How is this mission paving the way for the future?
Well, it's a great question, and I think it's really establishing the business model for the future. So you can see today I'm wearing my Artemis shirt. And when we go to the moon, we're going to go with commercial partners. And you know, NASA's goal here, we don't want to purchase, own, and operate the hardware the way we used to. We want to be one customer of many customers in a very robust commercial marketplace in low Earth orbit. But we also want to have numerous providers that are competing against each other on cost and innovation and safety. And really create this virtuous cycle of economic development and capability. And that's what today's return is going to represent. This is the next era in human spaceflight, where NASA gets to be the customer. We want to be a strong customer. We want to be a great partner, but we don't want to be the only ones that are operating with humans in space.
And while on board, Bob and Doug were, of course, conducting science experiments and spacewalks. And how are NASA's efforts on this station contributing to life back here on Earth?
So when we think about the International Space Station, it really is focused on how do we do those transformational activities that benefit human life here on Earth. And certainly, you know, when we think about advanced materials, industrialized biomedicine, these are the things that we're developing every day. Some examples would include, as far as advanced materials, very, very thin materials like an artificial retina for the human eyeball, so somebody who has macular degeneration might not have to lose their eyesight in the future. We can only create materials that thin in the microgravity of space. We cannot do it here in the gravity well of Earth. But that's just one of so many examples. When we think about how we compound pharmaceuticals, when we think about how we create immunizations for things like salmonella and other diseases, these are capabilities that are available to us because of the resource that is microgravity. But advanced materials, things like very pristine fiber optic cables, we call it Z-bland, for example. These are all things that we think that there is a marketplace for the future. So look, right now we're doing commercial resupply of the International Space Station. As of today, when Bob and Doug come home safely, we will be doing commercial crew to the International Space Station. The next big thing is we need commercial space stations themselves. And in order to create the market for commercial space stations, we have to have these transformational capabilities that come from the microgravity environment. And that's really what we're developing right now.
As you know, a big day for NASA today, but how about a big week? This week alone, we launched Mars 2020. Artemis 1's launch vehicle stage adapter was delivered to Kennedy Space Center, and here we are completing the first commercially crewed mission to the International Space Station. What are your thoughts on the state of the agency at this point?
So make no mistake, NASA's budget right now is the highest it's ever been in nominal dollars. And it's at $22 billion. The budget request that President Trump gave us that is before the House and the Senate right now is $25.2 billion. It's not just about sustaining capabilities like commercial crew, commercial resupply, the International Space Station. It's also about developing new capabilities so that the United States of America can stay the preeminent spacefaring nation. It's why we created the Artemis program to go to the moon sustainably with commercial partners and international partners to use the resources of the moon to live and work for long periods of time, and then take all of that knowledge onto Mars. And of course, as you mentioned on Thursday, we launched another Mars mission. The most sophisticated robot that NASA has ever developed is right now on its way to Mars, and we're going to prove that we can turn the carbon dioxide atmosphere of Mars into pure oxygen for life support. But there's so many other things. We're looking for life on another world. We're looking for signs of ancient life on Mars. We're talking about microbial life, but life nonetheless. And this is really a bright moment for NASA. I want to be clear, though. We need support from our members of Congress in both the House and the Senate. We need to be able to get that $25.2 billion budget that we have requested. And so I'm working with members of Congress and senators on both sides of the aisle every day, doing town halls across the country. We are in great shape. But in order to stay #1 in the world, we're going to need the resources that the president has requested.
Jim, thanks for joining us today. Such an exciting day. And in case you missed it just moments ago, both SpaceX and NASA are both a go for deorbit burn. So with that, we'll send it back to Dan and Kate at Hawthorne for the latest.
All right. Thank you so much, Courtney. Great to hear from the administrator. And we're in it now. We're kind of in the final stretch. This is what I feel like we've been waiting for the last couple of hours, and it feels pretty great to be here.
Yeah, it certainly does. In this next phase of the mission, Dragon has a series of steps to complete before returning Bob and Doug home. As you've heard us talk a little bit so far this morning, Dragon will maneuver to the correct attitude and jettison its trunk, which is the cylindrical, unpressurized part of the assembly. We need to expose the heat shield in order to prepare the capsule for atmospheric reentry. So we will. Oh, there we got a nice view of Bob and Doug in their suits. This is the first time we've seen them in their suits and in their chairs this morning. So there they are, tapping away, preparing to initiate the deorbit sequence. So let's talk a little. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, just like in the lead up in the last couple of minutes, we heard they had good suit leak checks. As Kate described earlier, once the leak checks are complete, they don't keep the suit pressurized, so visors are open. They're going to have cool air running through their suits and the cabin and just getting ready for the ride.
Yeah. Whenever they are re-entering the atmosphere, the external temperature will reach about 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The internal temperature of the cabin, however, will stay around 85 degrees Fahrenheit. We have a couple of systems in place to keep it cool and comfortable for Bob and Doug as they are returning. Like Dan just said, there will be some cool air flowing through their suits. The cabin itself will also be purged with cooler air as well. So that will assist in making sure that the temperature stays pretty temperate inside the capsule.
And I mean, we're just 42 minutes and 50 seconds away from things really kicking up. And this is going to be when we really start to do that first maneuver to get ready to jettison the trunk. And then we'll do that claw and trunk separation. And then it's time for just kind of that final firing of those engines, that really just that downhill ride.
Yeah, those forward bulkhead thrusters, there are 4 of them, 4 of those Draco thrusters there at the top of the capsule near the nose cone. Those will be utilized to perform the deorbit burn. This burn is what will essentially give Dragon its final trajectory back home. This is the last burn that the capsule will perform. If you've been following along since yesterday afternoon, you know that there have been a number of burns completed. This deorbit burn will be the final one. It will last about 11.5 minutes. After that burn completes, we no longer need to utilize those Draco thrusters, and we want to protect the forward hatch up there. So we close the nose cone and lock it up. We're expecting that event to happen at 11:11 a.m. Pacific. About 10 minutes, or excuse me, 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Wow, mental math on air is hard. 25 minutes after that, the capsule will be re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, and like I mentioned, approaching about 3,500 degrees, and that's because
we're in that heat of reentry, and so that's where things will really heat up for Bob and Doug on their reentry, and that's where we'll have that comms blackout. And we actually have a Twitter question that's germane to this right now, where Stephen asked, during the blackout, will you not be able to communicate with Bob and Doug, but you will be able to track them? And it's kind of a mix. We won't be able to talk to Bob and Doug. We won't be able to send or receive any data from the Dragon spacecraft. So we won't have basically telemetry-driven tracking, but we know exactly where they're going to be as their orbit's already been calculated. We've had this orbit calculated since yesterday, essentially. It's gotten fine-tuned as we've done those burns, but we'll know exactly where they're supposed to be, even though we can't communicate during that time.
Exactly. And even though we won't be able to send or receive signals or commands or telemetry, Dragon is designed to be fully autonomous. At that point, it is driving itself anyway, so there's really nothing to be worried about. Bob and Doug's primary function at that point is to monitor all of the telemetry that they see on their screens and to stay comfy.
Yeah, and once they're through that, that initial entry, we'll have that part called entry interface, which we kind of explained as that's when the capsule's really experiencing aerodynamics. They've been flying around in the vacuum of space with no air, so no lift, drag, stuff like that on their capsule. And entry interface is where they're really starting to hit the atmosphere, and it's affecting the capsule. And it'll continue to use its Draco thrusters on the service section to really guide it back home.
Yeah, exactly. So speaking of guiding it back home, here come the parachutes. At 11:44 a.m. Pacific or 18:44 Universal Time, we're going to be deploying the drogue parachutes. Drogue chutes are utilized for a couple of reasons. One, to continue to further decelerate the vehicle and also to stabilize it. Like Dan said, it will be experiencing some of those aerodynamic pressures, and so we want to make sure that the capsule is well and stable before we deploy the main parachutes. Those main chutes will be deploying at 11:45 a.m. and there will be 4 of them. Those will essentially deploy, and it takes a couple seconds for them to fully inflate. So it might look a little funny at first, but we assure you that they are working properly, and it just takes a couple seconds for the air to continue to catch in them and for them to fully expand to their large rounder shape. So after those chutes deploy, it only takes 3.5 minutes for Bob and Doug to splash down. That'll be occurring at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:48 Universal. And like we've mentioned before, our splashdown location is off the coast, off the western coast of Florida. We're aiming for a location near Pensacola. Our recovery vessel Go Navigator is currently in location, ready and waiting for splashdown. They're actually going to be waiting about 3 nautical miles away from that splashdown point.
Yeah, we got the call that they were on station. We also got the call that the NASA WB-57 airplane is in the air, and we've actually seen a couple of brief spurts of video. That's the airborne asset that we'll have. That WB-57 is a high-altitude research plane that NASA flies. It's outfitted with a number of imaging cameras. The main one that will be seen is an infrared one. If you watched the Demo 1 splashdown, which I'm sure you all did, you were able to see that first, and this is actually a glimpse of that WB-57 camera. We'll be getting this back, and if we acquire it the same time we did for Demo 1, we were able to see the capsule while it was still in that atmospheric reentry, so it was just this really bright light that all of a sudden lit up the sky, and that was the first view we got of Dragon. And so we'll use that to hopefully see during the entry, and then the initial parachute deploys, and then we'll have a couple more assets on the ground or on the water, on the boat, that will get a couple more views of Dragon as it delivers Bob and Doug safely to the ocean.
Yeah, so as you can hear, all of this excitement will be happening in pretty rapid succession. On your screen now, we can see closest to the camera, we have NASA astronaut Doug Hurley. He is the pilot or the commander for this particular mission, and then there now on the camera to the right is NASA astronaut Bob Behnken. We are very fondly looking forward to bringing our space dads home this morning. And it looks like we mentioned before, that'll be happening in about an hour and a half. Again, targeting splashdown for 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:48 Universal Time. But like we mentioned before, the action really begins at the claw separation milestone,
which is slated for 10:51 a.m. Pacific in about 38 minutes from now. So
again, we are continuing to take questions this morning through Twitter using the hashtag AskNASA. Our next question comes to us from F1 Fanatic. Do the astronauts need to have face masks down during reentry? That is a great question. Very astute observation that those visors are in the upward position. So right now, these suits are unpressurized and Bob and Doug are breathing just the normal cabin air. Those face masks, our visors as we refer to them, do need to be lowered and locked during the reentry period. We need the spacesuit to be fully enclosed during the more dynamic elements of operations, and certainly the reentry period is one of them. So we'll actually at one point during the deorbit burn preparation phase, we will actually hear communication between ground station, from ground here, mission control headquarters at SpaceX to Bob and Doug, just to confirm and double check that those visors are in place where they should be. Our next question comes to us from Philip. Where exactly are the parachutes stored before deployment?
They are stored in 2 separate compartments on the Dragon spacecraft, on a side of the vehicle that has a deployable panel. The drogue parachutes are stored in the upper part. It's called the upper bulkhead, and they're deployed by 2 drogue motors or mortars. So pyrotechnics that are fired to actually deploy those drogue parachutes. Just further down the panel, kind of at the base of the spacecraft, is where the 4 main parachutes are stored. And again, those get drawn out by the drogue chutes. There are redundant systems in place to make sure that if the first set of mortars don't fire, you have backups to get these chutes deployed. We're one fault tolerant on both the drogue parachutes and the main parachutes. So 1 out of 2 drogues and 3 out of 4 mains is what the vehicle's been rated and tested to. SpaceX has done a tremendous amount of testing on these parachutes, even within just the last several months in the lead up to the mission. As parachutes, obviously a very critical part of the reentry, and this is something that is very meticulously packed and documented before the start of any mission. And NASA assisting SpaceX, as we have some experts who have been involved in parachute missions for decades. But the parachutes are stored under deployable panels, and we'll see them basically fire open as the parachutes come out and deploy at the different altitudes.
Yeah, those panels are basically located above and below the side hatch panel. So if you are looking at the Dragon capsule, the anchor point for those parachutes will ensure that the side hatch will effectively be as far away from the ocean surface as possible, ensuring that we're able to expedite the process of egressing Bob and Doug from the capsule and the whole recovery process as a whole. Great question.
All right, our next one comes from Scott. He wants to know, what are the tablets on their legs used for? What kind of devices are they? I think you've heard him call out a few times that they're using iPads on board, and they're really just essentially their user manuals. They're able to dial up different procedures, checklists, things that they're looking for throughout their flight. They're able to Velcro them essentially to their suits, and just like the main displays in front of them, they're touchscreen enabled, and they have the touchscreen capable gloves in their suits. It's really just another information source. Dragon doesn't have the big paper manuals that we were used to in the shuttle era and things like that, just kind of streamlining everything as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we mentioned before, this is a demonstration mission. And so Bob and Doug's job here is to make sure that everything is working as it should be. So a lot of what they're doing is going to simply be monitoring, well, not simply, paying attention can be, especially whenever there's a lot going on dynamically around you, is staying focused can be tough. So it's not an easy job what they have coming up, but they will essentially be responsible for monitoring all the data and telemetry that is being received on screens. And part of the debriefing that will happen once they get back on land is quite simply, was there anything that happened in reality that you weren't expecting or differed from what you were instructed would occur? So making sure that in the future fully operational missions that we have, starting with Crew 1, launching later this year, that those crews are fully prepared and that we make those, essentially those instruction manuals that they do have access to as perfect as possible, because it is essential that we have correct information and that the crew is informed and aware of all the operations that are going on, regardless of whether or not they're not the ones necessarily commanding, because the vehicle is autonomous, but it is important that they do know what's going on.
All right, our next question comes from Sam, might be the most important one of the day. Wanted to know if Bob and Doug can listen to the SpaceX webcast when they're inside the Dragon capsule. I mean, I certainly hope so. It's not like they have too much else on their mind.
Right.
No, they're not able to listen to us, but one kind of fun fact that always kind of makes us geek out a little bit is the crew members on board the space station will usually get NASA TV pumped up to them anytime their crewmates are launching or landing. So they're able to watch their friends and former crewmates as of just a few hours ago return home. So Chris, if you're watching, hi.
Great question. Another one comes to us from Ruhr Rocker. Does the Dragon capsule have windows where Bob and Doug can look out? Absolutely. Actually, one of my favorite pictures that Doug Hurley has posted on Instagram to date was actually one of the first pictures he posted at the beginning of this mission, was a shot of what he could see outside of Crew Dragon's windows. There is a window located on either side of the side hatch, and it certainly will provide visual confirmation that re-entry is happening. Like Dan mentioned before, they'll be able to see a little bit of the energy that's being expelled during the re-entry period. Some of those pieces of the ablative material, as they heat up and are designed to flicker away, they'll actually be able to see that from the windows themselves. So it'll be quite the fireworks show.
All right, our next one comes from Joe. Wants to know, does the Dragon capsule have Netflix? Another important question.
Yeah, the answer to that is no. As our views here of the capsule cycle through, we'll be able to see what their screens look like. There we go. So there in the center screen, we actually have the ground tracking map. As you can see there, actually it might be kind of hard to make out, but Dragon is actually crossing over the Atlantic Ocean, now approaching what looks like England and Ireland. So it will be crossing over into Europe soon. And also on those screens to the left and the right of that ground track screen were their telemetry screens. So those will be the interface that they use during the deorbit burn, and that's what they'll essentially use to make sure that everything is looking good and performing nominally.
Yeah, and I mean, that center screen that you just saw, that's essentially the same map that we've been looking at throughout our coverage here today. So they're looking at a lot of the same data that we're trying to give you guys down here on the ground. Just where are they over the Earth? Because it can be a little disorienting to look out the window and figure it out quickly. But they're able to see just how far along their orbit they are, where those milestones are coming up. So they can just, again, they're in a monitor mode and they're ready, locked and loaded to jump in if required. Our next question comes from Roshan, who 7-year-old Ian wants to know, why is the Dragon capsule cone-shaped? For a very specific reason, and it's why a lot of spacecraft are in the capsule shape. When they were trying to really figure out the most efficient way to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, both from handling the trajectory without having wings like a space shuttle, starting over. When they were really first trying to figure out how to best shape a spacecraft to efficiently and effectively re-enter the Earth's atmosphere in the safest configuration, where they essentially landed on was a cone shape. Or a capsule shape. There were very initial drawings that you could find all manner of spacecraft that were put into wind tunnels, but at the end of the day, all the way back in the early days of spaceflight, when we were in the Mercury and the very early days, they were able to determine that the capsule shape was really the most efficient. That shape of heat shield dissipated the heat the best, was the easiest to control, and was really the safest option. And physics haven't changed since the 60s, at least not a great deal. So that's why you still see a lot of capsule-shaped spacecraft, and it's really just for re-entering an atmosphere. Good question.
So there on your screen, again, we have live shots coming from Dragon Endeavour as it is making its way back towards Earth. We are approaching the final steps of the day of the mission, in fact. And at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:18 a.m. or p.m. excuse me, Universal, we will have the splashdown of Dragon Endeavour. So right now, Bob and Doug are essentially cycling through, preparing for what we call deorbit burn initiation. This will be where the deorbit burn is what will be placing Dragon on its final trajectory to a specific landing location. That location there were 7 possible ones. We determined the best one for today's reentry to be off the coast of Florida near Pensacola. The recovery vessel Go Navigator is in place, ready and waiting. And seems like Bob and Doug are pretty comfortable there. They are in their spacesuits. The leak check has been performed, and we got the call out that it was nominal. So everything good there. Right now, those visors are in the up position. They will be closed and locked whenever we get into the dynamic portion here upcoming in just a few minutes. Checking my timeline here.
We're just about 24 minutes and 20 seconds from things really picking up. That's when we'll start to get into the attitude to separate the trunk, and just about 8 minutes after that is when we'll start the deorbit burn. And again, that'll be the longest burn of Dragon's return journey. the latest timeline we got had it lasting for about 11 minutes and 22 seconds. It'll be the last firing of those forward bulkhead thrusters. The 4 Dracos at the very top of Dragon that'll eventually be covered up by the nose cone following the deorbit burn. And as we've said before, that deorbit burn is what commits them to coming home. When that happens, that capsule is re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, and that'll put them essentially on a collision course with planet Earth. It lines up their orbit to intersect with that splashdown point in the Gulf of Mexico. And while we have just a few more minutes until we get to that, we still have some questions coming in. Again, if you have one, jump over on Twitter, use the hashtag AskNASA. This one comes from Scarif Survivor, who wants to know, does Dragon lose radio data contact with satellite or ground stations during reentry? And the answer is really everything. As that plasma builds up around the spacecraft, it essentially prevents signals being sent or transmitted or received by Dragon's antennas around the outside of the spacecraft. So it's both satellites and ground stations that it won't be able to communicate with. But again, Dragon continues flying itself. We know what its orbit is plotted out to be, so we know where it is, and we even know the expected time of that blackout in about 6 minutes. So it does lose contact with everything. We won't be able to hear from Bob and Doug until they're on the other side of that blackout, and then we'll reestablish communication with Dragon. All right, we have another one from Nettie Banda. Wanted to know how many seats are in Dragon.
So as you can see on your screen there are actually, I guess one is hidden. There are actually 4 chairs there available. We will be utilizing all 4 seats on the Crew 1 mission launching later this year, currently targeted for September. Right now, Bob and Doug are only occupying 2 of them, as this is a demonstration mission. So yeah, we will be utilizing all 4 of those seats in future missions, but as of right now, I believe it was on the launch portion of the mission, one of those seats was occupied by Tremor, who, if you've been following along, is the sequined dinosaur that was voted on by the 2 sons from Bob and Doug as what should be the 0G indicator. So Tremor was strapped into a seat during ascent, and when they got the okay to release him, he started floating into the capsule and you know, gave us its sequined glory there on the edge of space.
All right. Well, again, just another time hack as we're coming up on these. We're just a little over 20 minutes from the start of all of our deorbit burn sequencing starting. So we're looking at that to really pick up at about 10:48 as we'll start getting into the attitude for trunk separation. And then we start basically executing a bunch of steps that are going to commit Bob and Doug to this reentry.
Yeah, we're looking forward to those. It'll be quite the journey. Now, of course, with respect to the deorbit burn, Bob and Doug will remain in their seats and strapped in for the entire duration. In fact, they won't be exiting those seats until they're able to egress or exit the capsule after it has splashed down and been recovered out of the ocean and safely resting in the nest of the recovery vessel. Along that note, our next Twitter question is from Brett. The question is, what is the orientation of the astronauts when seated? As in, do they face the front or the top of the capsule, and do they find it comfortable? Great question there. So in the views that we just had a couple minutes ago, they were, I guess, what we would call in the reclined position. They were facing towards the top of the capsule. During the launch portion, whenever they were actually getting into the capsule, back in late May, the seats were actuated in the down position where they were facing towards the hatch. The angle of difference is about 40 degrees between the two positions. They actuate in order to make sure that whenever there are G's being experienced, that it is in the most comfortable and safely ergonomic way possible. So that's where seat or actuation comes in handy. Also, it also helps them to get in and out of the capsule. It's a little trickier whenever the seats are in the up position or when they're reclined facing upward toward the top of the capsule. As for comfort level, I've heard that they have found it pretty comfortable. The seats are actually custom fitted for each astronaut destined to be flying in it. So whenever a crew member is assigned to a mission, they will also be assigned a seat specifically. So there will be no mid-flight fire drills where everyone is switching seats. Everyone has a designated seat. They're essentially small, medium, and large, and the armrests are also customizable depending on how long the crew member's forearm is. So we have taken many steps with comfort in mind, as well as style. You've seen those spacesuits. They look pretty good, in my opinion, but those spacesuits are also similarly custom fitted for each individual crew member. So with the combination of the custom fit of the suit, as well as the custom fit of the seats, we have aimed to make it as comfortable as possible in the event of some sort of situation where we need to wave off an activity for up to 48 hours. That's a long time to be in a confined space, even if you are highly trained like these guys. So yeah, making sure that they are as comfortable as possible while inside the cabin was certainly high priority.
All right, our next question comes from Richard. This one deals with kind of hygiene on the space station. Just curious how the astronauts that have been on station a while, how do they stay so clean cut? I know there's not a barber on board. Do they cut their own hair? It just looks clean cut. Do they shower, do laundry? How do they do it? They do have to cut their own hair. Even the current commander, Chris Cassidy, who's still on board, famously shaved his head once as his fellow crewmate Luca Parmitano was about to arrive on space station, just so he had some bald company. But they do have trimmers on board the International Space Station that have a vacuum attached to them, so they're not just getting hair just all throughout the cabin, as like everything else, hair would just tend to float around and get caught in the drafts of the air circulation on board. So they use basically vacuum cutters in order to give themselves haircuts. So that's how they're able to do it. No professional stylists up there, but they're able to make do and stay a little less shaggy.
Quick time check here as we just passed 10:30. It's now 10:32 here in California. We are less than 20 minutes away from our first event here on our list as Bob and Doug begin to continue to check off the boxes of their return home. That first event is claw separation. That's essentially the initiation of trunk jettison. All of that means that we will need to unlatch the claw from the trunk. That is the mechanism that holds and connects the trunk to the capsule, delivers fluid, telemetry, power, all that good stuff. We need to expose the trunk in order for the capsule to deorbit. So we will jettison the trunk and then we will begin a deorbit burn a couple minutes later. That deorbit burn is slated to begin at 10:56 a.m. Pacific, 18:56 Universal Coordinated Time. So in just under 23 minutes, we're expecting that to start. Once again, if you're just joining us, we've got some live views inside the Dragon Endeavour capsule. Bob and Doug there in their seats as they are making final preparations and doing final reviews as we get ready to initiate the deorbit sequence. Closest to the camera there is NASA astronaut Doug Hurley, and further away from the camera is NASA astronaut Bob Behnken. These are two incredibly wonderful humans. We affectionately call them our space dads here at SpaceX. It's been such an honor to be able to fly them. Of course, Doug Hurley was actually the pilot of the final space shuttle mission, STS-135, back in 2011. And honestly, when I heard that he was assigned to this mission, I cried because, just to have the opportunity to return the pilot of that final mission to the space station in this capacity is so cool. And I've loved following this mission since the moment that we started training for it here in Hawthorne.
Well, we know that they're ready. They've done all of their suit checkouts, everything to get themselves to this point. And once we begin these events, they're going to keep a very close eye. As again, crew is always in the loop to step in. But Dragon going to be executing all of these different maneuvers and separation events automatically via a pre-programmed timeline. We're continuing to count down. We'll have our first maneuver in a little under 13 minutes. We're a little over 15 minutes from the claw separation. That claw connecting the service module to the Dragon capsule itself. A series of quick disconnects will retract, cutting off any of the fluid and data paths between the two. And then shortly after that, just a few seconds later, the trunk will separate. And then we will be just less than 5 minutes away from that deorbit burn. Again, deorbit burn expected to last 11 minutes and 22 seconds.
Now, of course, during reentry, Bob and Doug will be experiencing a couple of Gs. We're anticipating them to feel about 4 Gs during reentry. This will make it a little difficult for them to move their arms around. Not impossible, but essentially what they're doing right now is reviewing all of the event details for splashdown, making sure that and I've said this before, they have rehearsed this both they've rehearsed the sequence of events in person with the recovery team, as well as through simulations here at Mission Control or at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. So at this point, because it will be difficult for them to maybe flip through to the exact part of the procedure they might want to review during the actual reentry event itself, they are reviewing those now in preparation for that splashdown or for the reentry sequence.
We've got another Twitter question. This one from Laura Mountain. This one's pretty cool. Is it quiet in the Dragon, or does it sound like an airplane? Well, it doesn't sound like an airplane, at least not right now, as they're still flying through the vacuum of space. There's none of that rushing air. They'll get some of that once they're further down during their descent. And then they're also able to hear when the Draco thrusters fire. And one of the really cool things they've done to train the crew is SpaceX had a number of microphones placed throughout the cabin during that Demo 1 flight last year. And they were able to record what it sounded like inside through all of the major burns, the launch, the descent and landing, everything. And in the trainer upstairs here at Hawthorne at SpaceX headquarters, they have speakers set up where as they're doing simulations or practice runs of the different phases of the mission, they're able to hear what it should sound like inside Dragon as they're going through that. So I know that's one thing Bob pointed out is one of the things they're looking for is does this sound like I was expecting it to? Does this look like, is that a light I'm supposed to see? All of those different things that for them is like reflex by the time they've trained it this much. All right, well, at this moment, we are less than 10 minutes away from this sequence starting. We are just about 9 minutes away, in fact. And first, we'll see that maneuver where we'll get into the proper attitude or point Dragon really in the right direction for the claw and trunk separation. We're essentially going to do a 90-degree yaw maneuver, turn Dragon sideways to make sure the trunk goes out and away, not coming out in front of or behind the capsule, essentially re-entering the atmosphere with the capsule. We're going to avoid that. And then Dragon will position itself for the deorbit burn. It's going to point those forward bulkhead thrusters into the direction that it's currently traveling. This is called a retrograde maneuver, and this is done specifically to, we're going to slow the capsule down, but more than anything, we're changing the perigee or the lowest point of the capsule's orbit. Again, essentially putting it up on an intersection point with that spot in the Gulf where we're coming home. Eight minutes, Kate.
We are getting close.
Dragon SpaceX for deorbit sequence.
Go ahead.
All right, Doug, we are 5 minutes out from deorbit sequence start. In addition, just wanted to inform you we are expecting some RADICOM during claw and trunk set due to vehicle orientation.
Okay, copy. We see 4:45 left for the slew, and then RADICOM during the claw set.
Good read back, Doug.
Kate, we are almost 4 minutes away from this starting.
Yeah, we just heard the call out there, confirmation from SpaceX Core down here at Mission Control to Crew Dragon that we now under 5, but at the time of the call, 5 minutes away from deorbit sequence start. So like we've been mentioning before, that deorbit sequence will involve separating from the trunk and performing the deorbit burn. As you may have noticed on your the ground tracking map that we've been showing you before, Bob and Doug were in their last orbit around Earth. I can't remember what the number was that you quoted earlier, Dan, but they have done thousands of orbits around Earth during their 2-month duration on station. So it is really exciting that the line that we see on that trajectory map is no longer fully around it. They're coming home.
We're not seeing 2 lines showing what their next orbit is going to be. They are on their final orbit of planet Earth, and this is their 1,024th orbit around our planet since they launched back in May of earlier this year. So we're counting down. We're under 3 minutes away from that first maneuver, and that's going to be a slew, as you heard Doug radio down. And that's essentially, we're going to change the attitude. We're going to use those Draco thrusters to essentially spin Dragon about 90 degrees to the side so we can jettison that trunk. And that'll be done in the 2 stages. We'll do the claw separation and then the trunk separation. 2 minutes, 32 seconds, and counting. This is where things really pick up. This is where we really commit to coming home. And this is where we're in kind of the final stages of Bob and Doug's trip in outer space. And pretty soon we'll be seeing them in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, well, they are staying comfortable and continuing to monitor data and telemetry in the vehicle. Dragon is actually doing a couple of things itself to prepare for this deorbit sequence. Again, it's doing these things autonomously. It's isolating the thermal control system loops from the radiator. This is the system that will help keep Bob and Doug cool while they are re-entering the atmosphere. Like we've said before, the external temperature will reach 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit, and that thermal control system is what helps keep them cool during that time. Also, Dragon is initiating the separation of the claw mechanism, which will terminate the data, the power, and the fluid connections between the capsule and the trunk. So right now, the vehicle is preparing to execute that, and we are anticipating execution of claw separation in 3 minutes and 35 seconds. So, we've been here for 10 hours, I think, at this point. The webcast as a whole has been going on for almost a little bit less than 24 hours. So, we're in the final moments here as Dragon is beginning its journey home to bring Bob and Doug back to Earth.
Yeah, this is the moment that Dragon is in the position to start coming home. The recovery team's already on station. They have been for a while out there off the coast of Pensacola. We are less than a minute from starting all of these carefully choreographed sequences to essentially split Dragon in half, get rid of that trunk so we have the capsule, point the heat shield back down towards Earth following that deorbit burn, and then we bring them home. We are just about 30 seconds away now from maneuvering Dragon to get ready to get rid of that claw first, and then that trunk separation. There will be about a 35-second difference or 35-second jump from separating the claw to separating the trunk, and we'll keep our eyes on the ground track for you and make sure we get kind of exact locations of when these separation events are occurring. We're looking for both the claw and the trunk to separate cleanly, and then it'll be less than 5 minutes until we do the deorbit burn.
Yeah, and after that, it'll...
Dragon SpaceX, deorbit sequence start.
All right.
Great news.
Never copied.
All right, so the Draco thrusters on Dragon starting to fire. It's now moving its way over to the trunk jettison attitude. We should be about 2 minutes away from the claw separation.
For those of you that are just tuning in, you are just in time. At this point in the mission, we are now beginning to execute the final steps of Dragon Endeavor's return to Earth. Right now, we are performing the claw separation slew, which basically means Dragon is maneuvering itself into position, into the proper attitude in order to separate the Dragon trunk. And that will be initiated first by separation of the claw. The claw is the mechanism that attaches the trunk and the and the capsule together. The claw is what delivers power and telemetry and fluids, and we need to expose the heat shield. Right now the trunk is blocking that. So we will jettison the trunk, and we will then have allow us to maneuver into the proper attitude to perform the deorbit burn, which Dragon has performed a number of burns so far overnight and early this morning. And this will be the final burn that the vehicle has to perform for this mission.
And we just heard confirmation Dragon's in the trunk separation attitude. We are now standing by for claw separation.
And we just heard confirmation.
Ten seconds till trunk separation.
And we just heard confirmation of trunk separation.
The trunk separation coming at 10:52 a.m. Pacific, with Dragon flying over the Indian Ocean just off to the west of Australia.
Dragon SpaceX, we showed nominal trunk jettison.
Oh yeah, we felt it.
All right. So the crew just got the call, nominal trunk separation. That's exactly what we were looking for. Next up is going to be that deorbit burn. Again, this is the longest burn of their trip home. This is the longest firing of those thrusters and the last time we're using those forward bulkhead thrusters.
Exactly. Those forward bulkhead thrusters, like Dan just said, that's what we're using to perform the deorbit burn. Once we do that, we will then be able, that deorbit burn will last for 11.5 minutes. Once that is completed, we don't need to use those thrusters anymore, so we will close and lock the nose cone in preparation for re-entry.
So we're a little under 3.5 minutes from the start of the deorbit burn. Again, our sequence of events has started. We're able to separate that claw at 10:51 a.m. Pacific. At 17:51 GMT or Universal Time. And then at 10:52, just a minute later, the trunk separating while Dragon was flying just off to the west of Australia. So claw separated, trunk separated. Next up, deorbit burn.
Yeah, right now, Dragon is running exclusively on battery power now that the trunk is separated. Also, right now, telemetry is looking really good for the vehicle. The nitrox system is primed for cabin and suit cooling, and the heat shield is exposed and ready for atmospheric re-entry. Like I said before, that nitrox system, which is essentially the air that we breathe every day down here on Earth, nitrogen, oxygen, combination, a mixture. It's the same stuff that they put in your scuba tank if you are a scuba diver. The nitrox system is used to cool the cabin and the suit to keep the crew comfortable during the reentry phase. They will actually have cold air flowing through their suits themselves, as well as through the cabin itself. So a two-pronged approach to maintaining a comfortable temperature there inside the capsule. Like we said, the next event that we have coming up will be the deorbit burn, which we're expecting that to commence in 1 minute and 40 seconds. According to the ground tracking map there, Dragon is approaching the southwestern coast of Australia. And we are less than a...
We're excited.
Jinx.
We are inside a minute to deorbit burn. And again, one more time, this is the long one. This is expected to last 11 minutes, 22 seconds. This is that burn that commits the Dragon to re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. And you can get kind of a sense of just how far they're going to go. By the time they fire this burn, they're just going to be off to the southwest of Australia. And this is going to realign their orbit to intersect with that point off the coast of Pensacola where they're going to be splashing down.
Yeah, this is the moment where Dragon is fully committed to the reentry point. Again, we are aiming for just off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. Our recovery ship Go Navigator is ready and waiting to begin the recovery process right after splashdown occurs. Once again, if you're just joining us, we are now in the final steps of the deorbit sequence. The deorbit burn will be starting here in just a couple of seconds.
And we just heard confirmation deorbit burn has begun. That coming at 10:56 a.m. Pacific. Again, while the Dragon spacecraft just off the southwestern coast of Australia. So here we go. 11 more minutes to go.
I'm ready, and I'm sure it's safe to say that they're ready. They've done a number of interviews over the last few weeks while they were on station, and just the excitement and the enthusiasm for the mission is palpable. Just the opportunity to be able to fly these two incredible humans to the International Space Station and back is such an honor, and we're just really excited to get our space dads home safely and back to their families as quickly as possible. This deorbit burn that we are currently in, it will last 11 minutes and 22 seconds.
Minute 10 in, counting, so we have about 10 minutes to go. System performing knowledge forward and first we always want to hear, we always like to hear. Just under 10 minutes to go left in this burn.
And all within the last 10 minutes, again, it seemed like we had slow progressive events all morning, and then boom, within the last 10 minutes, we had a couple of things happening. Dragon maneuver.
On behalf of the entire SpaceX team, it's been a huge honor to help you get ready for today's historic mission. Know that we're with you, have an amazing flight, and enjoy those views of our beautiful planet.
Thanks, Jay. It is absolutely our honor to be part of this huge effort to get the United States back in the launch business. We'll talk to you from orbit. Thank you.
Nine, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 and Crew Dragon. Go NASA, go SpaceX, Godspeed, Spot and Doug.
.56 GMT. Dragon was flying about 260 statute miles just off the southwestern coast of Australia.
Muy buenas tardes a todos, ¿cómo están? Disculpen la demora, pero bueno, estábamos en vivo para una señal de televisión de noticias de nuestro país, de Argentina. Gracias por sumarse a esta transmisión que estamos haciendo con mucho placer, ¿sí? Espero que me envíen un ok de que se esté escuchando bien. Quisiera saber si me están escuchando. Si me mandan un ok. Bueno, ese es el centro de control que tiene SpaceX en Hawthorne, California. Estamos tomando la señal de SpaceX, o sea, la genera SpaceX y la toma la NASA, y es la transmisión oficial. Esto marca un hecho histórico también, una de las tantas primeras veces que se producen con esta misión. Hoy el principal centro de control está en una empresa privada. Por supuesto que también están monitoreando todos desde Houston, en el Centro Espacial Johnson, que tiene la NASA, desde donde está el centro de control de misión, desde donde siempre controlan todas las misiones de la NASA, pero esta misión fue la primera vez que estuvo a cargo de una empresa privada. Bueno, gracias por los avisos de que se escucha bien. Como decíamos, siempre la NASA controló sus misiones tripuladas desde el Centro Espacial Johnson en Houston, desde las Mercury hasta las últimas con el transbordo espacial allá por julio del 2011. Pero a partir de ahí, Estados Unidos no viajó más al espacio con astronautas propios despegando desde Norteamérica. Hacía 9 años que no se producía un lanzamiento con astronautas desde los Estados Unidos. Por eso esta misión fue histórica en ese sentido. Pero aparte, la primera vez que la gestionó una empresa privada. Por lo tanto, hoy el centro de control está aquí, en California, en lo que es la sede central de SpaceX. Todo sigue muy bien. Vamos a escuchar también un poquito la transmisión oficial para entender si todo sigue normal. Teóricamente a las 14:56, hora de Argentina. Voy a dar todos los horarios en Argentina para no mezclarnos. Argentina está en uso horario -3, GMT -3. 3 horas menos que Greenwich, 1 hora menos que una hora más, perdón, que la hora del Este de Estados Unidos, que es la que maneja la NASA. Así que son GMT-3, son las 14, en este momento las 15:05 en Argentina, ¿sí? Teóricamente ya se tendría que haber desprendido la cápsula Dragon, o Endeavour, como la bautizaron Hurley y Behnken, los astronautas. La cápsula, que tiene forma de cono, se tiene que haber separado ya de lo que es una especie de tanque de cilindro, que es el módulo de servicio, que es lo que le da toda la energía, ¿sí?, a la nave para que pueda funcionar. Así que en este momento ya la Endeavour tendría que estar solita, girando ya su última vuelta alrededor de la Tierra, ¿sí?, su última órbita. Les paso algunos datos a las 15:36, en media hora. En media hora ya tienen que estar ingresando en la atmósfera, ¿sí? También ya se encendieron los motores de la Endeavour para aminorar la velocidad, y de esa manera, a medida que aminora la velocidad, la gravedad terrestre va ganando y, entre comillas, la tira hacia abajo, ¿sí? La tira para que regrese a la Tierra. Les quiero agradecer muchísimo a todos los que se suman, especialmente a todos aquellos amigos y amigas de otros países. Hay gente de toda América, por los comentarios que estuvimos leyendo, mucha gente de España. Les agradezco mucho que mucha gente de España se haya sumado, en particular a un amigo que tenemos ya desde hace varios meses, Oscar Contreras, del canal Cure Planet. Se los recomiendo. Muchas gracias a todos por estar. Bueno, habíamos perdido un poquito la transmisión, disculpen, pérdida de señal. Bueno, como decía, gente de todos lados, muchas gracias. En los últimos minutos de la hora 2, ya llegando casi a las 3 de la tarde de Argentina, hace minutitos, como les contaba, la Dragon ya se separó de su módulo de servicio, el cilindro que le da energía. Ese cilindro va a caer a la atmósfera terrestre y se va a incinerar, y la Dragon va a caer de manera absolutamente controlada, con todo un escudo protector, un escudo ablativo, que hace que la cápsula en sí no se incinere, porque al ingresar a miles de kilómetros por hora, tengan en cuenta que la cápsula, cuando está orbitando la Tierra a la altura que lo hace, a la altura de la Estación Espacial Internacional, la velocidad orbital es de 28.000 kilómetros por hora. En pocos minutos, en menos de 10 minutos, esos 28.000 kilómetros por hora en el espacio exterior tienen que llegar a cero al momento, o casi cero, al momento de tocar contacto con el agua. Por eso esa disminución de la velocidad se transforma básicamente en energía calórica, ¿sí?, en calor, y es lo que hace que toda la cápsula se envuelva en una llama, literalmente. Se produce toda una ionización y hace imposible que puedan existir comunicaciones, ¿sí?, radiocomunicaciones. Por eso vamos a tener unos 6 minutos de blackout, de no comunicaciones. Van a ser 6 minutos tensos, por cierto, ¿sí?, esperando que esa caída salga como tal cual está planeada. Seguramente será así, es una cápsula muy, muy segura. Pero bueno, no deja de haber un riesgo, por supuesto. De hecho, yo creo que es más riesgoso el descenso, ¿sí?, el regreso a Tierra, que el lanzamiento en sí mismo. ¿Por qué decimos esto? Porque cuando se produce el lanzamiento, si llega a haber alguna falla, está la posibilidad de abortar. Es decir, el cohete puede dirigirse a otra dirección de lo planeada, puede explotar, no puede alcanzar la velocidad que se necesita, y la cápsula se puede desprender y caer con paracaídas al mar. Pero en este caso, en el regreso, es una caída libre, ¿sí? los técnicos de la misión, los astronautas también, aunque es todo un proceso automatizado, la Dragon se estabiliza en un determinado ángulo, se dirige en un determinado ángulo de reentrada y una vez que entra en la atmósfera es una caída libre, literalmente a través de la atmósfera. Luego se abren los paracaídas, así que es una de las etapas más delicadas, yo creo que es la más delicada de todas. Esperemos que todo salga bien, ¿sí? A las 15:36 se va a producir ese reingreso en la atmósfera. Yo quiero ver si se puede compartir. Déjenme que voy a dejar de compartir esta pantalla y permítanme que voy a compartir otra para mostrarles el lugar de amerizaje, ¿sí? Acá tenemos el Golfo de México y la zona de amerizaje estaba proyectada 4 zonas de amerizaje en el Golfo de México y 3 zonas de amerizaje sobre el Atlántico, es decir, hacia el este de la Florida, aquí, pero claro, el huracán Isaías está haciendo de las suyas e hizo imposible que se acercaran a esta zona. Así que la zona de amerizaje es esta de aquí, frente a la costa de Pensacola. Aquí lo tienen. ¿Sí? De hecho, los astronautas cuando bajen de la nave y luego de los chequeos médicos van a ir a la estación, a la base que tiene la Fuerza Aérea de Estados Unidos en Pensacola. ¿Sí? Aquí está Pensacola y si no era esa si no se podía descender sobre la costa de Pensacola, iban a descender sobre la costa de Panama City. Yo lo que les quiero remarcar y que prestemos atención es la increíble exactitud de este vuelo, la increíble exactitud de los cálculos que realizan esta gente para que al volver del espacio puedan elegir, miren el tamaño obviamente que tiene nuestro planeta, y pueden elegir entre 2 puntos muy, muy cercanos entre sí el amerizaje, o en Pensacola o en Panamá City. Una de las cosas que están trayendo Douglas Hurley, el comandante, y Robert Behnken, el piloto de la Endeavour, así fue como bautizaron a la Dragon Demo 2. Esta es una foto que hoy publicó en su Instagram el Centro Espacial Johnson de la NASA. En el último viaje que hicieron los norteamericanos despegando desde suelo estadounidense, llevaron, ¿sí? En aquel vuelo, llevaron una bandera, esta bandera de los Estados Unidos, y dice, esta bandera voló en el primer lanzamiento del transbordador espacial, en el STS-1, ¿sí? Vamos a agrandar la imagen. Voló en el STS-1 el 12 de abril de 1981, ¿sí? El primer vuelo, el Columbia, y voló en el STS-35, el Atlantis, el último vuelo del programa de transbordadores espaciales, en un lapso de casi 30 años. Y en la etiqueta de acá abajo dice solamente para ser removida o traída por la tripulación de un próximo lanzamiento del Centro Espacial Kennedy. Así que esta bandera, que había volado en 1981 al espacio y había regresado y luego voló en el último vuelo del transbordador espacial Atlantis, desde 2011 que estaba en la Estación Espacial Internacional. Y bueno, está llegando de regreso a la Tierra en la Dragon Endeavour con Hurley y con Behnken. Lo que vamos a ver en unos minutos, ¿sí? Ahí tenemos señales de NASA. Lo que vamos a ver en unos minutos es algo muy similar a esto. Esto fue el desacople de la primer Dragon tripulada, entre comillas, aunque no llevaba tripulación, llevaba un maniquí que fue hace un año, simplemente para la prueba. Ese fue el desacople. Ese fue el desacople de la Estación Espacial Internacional de la misión Demo 1. Esta fue la misión Demo 1. Hace un año. La misión Demo 2 es esta, la primera vez que tiene personas en su interior, que tiene tripulantes. Vamos a adelantar el video. Acá estaba en pleno descenso, esto es lo que vamos a ver hoy. Esa luz intensa que se ve son las llamas que se producen por el intenso calor que se genera por las intensas temperaturas que levanta, 1900 grados Celsius, tengan en cuenta. Finalmente se abren los primeros 2 paracaídas. Tiene 2 sistemas de paracaídas. Primero 2 paracaídas para nivelar la nave. Y 1 minuto después se van a despegar los 4 paracaídas principales. Esos son los 2 paracaídas que estabilizan a la nave y por supuesto que ya disminuyen en algo su velocidad. Y ahora se van a desplegar los 4 principales. Es la primera vez que una nave espacial tripulada utiliza 4 paracaídas. Las Apolo utilizaban 3. Ahí se despliegan los primeros 4. Una imagen hermosa. Esto ocurrió en marzo del año pasado, marzo de 2019, y fue la primera prueba de la Dragon. ¿Sí? Llevaba un maniquí, no llevaba personas, era la primera prueba. Tengan en cuenta que cuando se abren los primeros 2 paracaídas, la nave disminuye a hasta unos 150 kilómetros por hora. Antes viene a miles, ¿sí? Y cuando se enciendan, cuando se abren esos 4 paracaídas, la velocidad disminuye a 191 kilómetros por hora. En una primera fase, 191 kilómetros por hora. Luego, disminuye mucho más la velocidad. Vamos a adelantar un poquito. Ahí ya la Dragon Demo 1, marzo de 2019, el año pasado, amerizaba y de esa manera se completaba una etapa fundamental en todo lo que es esta gran etapa de la exploración espacial, que es el enviar astronautas al espacio a partir de empresas privadas. Recién el comandante de la misión, Douglas Hurley, avisó que el cono, la parte superior de la nave ya se cerró. Ese cono se abrió al momento en que se acercaban a la Estación Espacial Internacional hace ya más de 2 meses y se acoplaba. El cono ya está cerrado y la cápsula viene en perfectas condiciones en cuanto a velocidad y dirección. Eso es fundamental. La velocidad y la dirección de la nave es fundamental para poder lograr un amerizaje exitoso. Muchas gracias a todos los que se suman. Somos casi 1000 personas entre ambos canales. Estamos transmitiendo por el canal del Planetario de la Universidad Nacional de La Plata y por mi canal propio, Diego Bagú. Gracias por sumarse y por compartir este momento tan especial. A los astronautas los irán a buscar en un barco importante en tamaño, se llama Go Navigator, que es de SPACEX, y se van a acercar a la cápsula 2 botes más rápidos, 2 botes pequeños. Esos 2 botes pequeños van a hacer todo el amarraje necesario y la van a traer hacia el Go Navigator, hacia el buque. El buque la va a elevar a la nave con los astronautas adentro. No va a ser como en el Apolo, aquellos que recuerden y que hayan vivido aquellos años gloriosos del programa espacial Apolo, o nosotros, otros que no hemos vivido, pero lo hemos visto por videos. Los astronautas no van a salir de la cápsula en el mar y los van a elevar con algún helicóptero o algo por el estilo, sino que ese barco, el Go Navigator, tiene una especie de grúa, ¿sí? Va a colocar la nave arriba de él y a partir de ahí los astronautas van a salir. El Go Navigator es este que tenemos acá. A ver, hoy lo teníamos por aquí, déjenme ver. Ah, disculpen, pensé que estaban acá. Bueno. Acá tenemos una imagen, ¿sí? De la parte, del barco en donde elevan a la cápsula y la dejan en su sitio. Ahí están hablando justamente del Go Navigator. Estos son los astronautas. A la izquierda tienen a Robert Behnken, piloto de la nave Demo 2 Endeavour, y a la derecha tienen a Douglas Hurley, el comandante. Ambos veteranos de 2 vuelos espaciales en el transbordador espacial. Y un dato, una curiosidad que ayer nos compartía Diego Córdoba, nuestro amigo, estuvo en nuestra transmisión, nos comentaba que, bueno, estos 2 astronautas están casados también con 2 astronautas, en particular la señora de Hurley, el comandante, ya dejó el cuerpo de astronautas de la NASA, pero Arthur Megan, la esposa de Behnken, sigue siendo astronauta y de hecho va a ser la comandante de la próxima misión espacial de SpaceX, que será en septiembre. Por eso es que han adelantado el regreso. Realmente es increíble la velocidad con que esta gente está trabajando y está obteniendo resultados. Así que en la primera misión de la Dragon va un astronauta y en la segunda misión, ya en la primera operativa, va su señora. Realmente increíble, ¿sí? Realmente impresionante. Ese señor, Robert Behnken, del que estamos hablando, es el que se parece a Marcelo Gallardo, exactamente. Muchos argentinos entienden, digamos, a los americanos y a los españoles. Les contamos que, bueno, hay un equipo de fútbol en Argentina y su técnico, muy famoso, por cierto, es muy parecido. O Behnken se parece a Gallardo o Gallardo se parece a Behnken, digamos. Muy parecido, realmente. Bueno, ya estamos, son y 21 y 22, cada vez más cerca de lo que es el regreso tan esperado. Una vez que los astronautas ya estén, hayan descendido, que la cápsula Endeavour esté ya en la cubierta del Go Navigator, del barco de SpaceX, van a salir de la nave, le harán todos los chequeos necesarios, los médicos. Hay más de 40 personas, ¿sí?, en todo lo que es la operación, más de 40 personas en el barco, entre personal de SpaceX y de NASA, y luego que le hagan todos los chequeos, van a ir a la base que tiene la Estación de la Fuerza Aérea de los Estados Unidos en Pensacola. Muchas gracias a todos los que se sumaron, ¿sí? Más de 1000 personas en este directo. Realmente estamos muy contentos de compartirlo con todos ustedes. Comentábamos hoy más temprano que eso que estamos viendo es la señal de SpaceX y que la misma NASA toma. Y es el centro espacial, es la base, mejor dicho, la base que tiene SpaceX en Hawthorne, California. Ese es el centro de emisión, el centro de control de emisión de SpaceX. Y lo que ven atrás, pueden ver que es un cuarto muy minimalista en términos estéticos, bien a lo SpaceX. Los trajes, de hecho, son un ejemplo de ello, del minimalismo con el que trabajan. Me refiero en términos estéticos, ¿no? Y como pueden ver, es toda una sección vidriada y allá ven montones de cosas, ¿verdad? Ven cajas, pantallas, máquinas. Bueno, permítanme decirles que eso que están viendo ahí es donde ellos construyen y desarrollan sus cohetes. Realmente lo de SpaceX es asombroso por donde se lo mire. Ahí mismo donde diseñan, desarrollan y construyen los cohetes, ponen 4 vidrios y ese es el centro de control de emisión. Algo realmente impresionante. De hecho, ellos mismos han construido los trajes espaciales. Nunca antes una empresa o una institución pudo lograr tantas cosas y en tan poco tiempo. Realmente esto marca un antes y un después en la historia espacial. Por supuesto que la misión no terminó, de hecho falta la parte más compleja. Esperemos que salga todo bien desde ya. Pero esto es un antes y un después en la historia espacial. Cuando en muy poquitos años estemos regresando a la Luna de manera tripulada y se esté pensando ya en el primer viaje, tripulado a Marte, este será uno de los días que recordemos como un antes y un después que posibilitó, ¿sí?, estas próximas misiones que realmente serán históricas. Pregunta Alex, ¿en cuántos minutos llegan? En muy poquitos, a las 15:36, son las 15:25. En 11 minutos tendrían que estar ingresando a la atmósfera. Y en el momento en que ingresen, de miles de kilómetros por hora, el roce con la atmósfera va a producir toda una bola de ionización. Va a alcanzar la nave los 1900 grados Celsius y eso va a provocar que no pueda haber comunicaciones, radiocomunicaciones. Por lo tanto, durante 6 minutos no vamos a tener comunicación con los astronautas, esperando que todo salga bien. Van a ser 6 minutos largos, por cierto. El centro de control de SpaceX le acaba de decir a los astronautas que está todo muy bien y que la inclinación de la nave respecto de su órbita es la adecuada. Así que los astronautas muy tranquilos le dijeron, ok, perfecto, todo entendido. Dice Esteban, como en la película Apolo 13, exactamente. En la película Apolo 13 se ve muy bien ese proceso de ionización y la imposibilidad de comunicarse. Preguntaban por ahí respecto, Ryuk Ridman preguntaba, ¿esa energía ionizante afecta a los tripulantes? No los afecta en absoluto. La cápsula está absolutamente, es hermética, ¿sí? Están más que cuidados en el interior de la misma. Es importante que la inclinación de la nave sea la correcta para que los proteja el escudo protector. El escudo protector hace que de un lado, ¿sí?, soporte temperaturas de 1900 grados centígrados, pero del otro lado, que es el interior de la cápsula, ¿sí?, no sienten esa temperatura. Esto ocurre así desde hace muchos años. Les recordamos que este es el primer amerizaje, el primer descenso desde el espacio de una nave tripulada en 45 años. El último descenso se produjo en 1975, cuando los astronautas del Apolo regresaron del programa espacial Apolo-Soyuz, la primera vez en que una cápsula norteamericana, Apolo, se acoplaba en el espacio con una cápsula Soyuz de la, en esos momentos, Unión Soviética. Ese fue el último amerizaje. Luego, todos los descensos fueron en tierra, ya sea con las Soyuz rusas, que descienden en la Siberia, en la estepa rusa, o en las pistas de aterrizaje que utilizaba la NASA con el transbordador espacial, tanto en la base Edwards en California como en las mismas pistas o en la misma pista del Centro Espacial Kennedy en la Florida. Así que para muchos, me incluyo, es la primera vez que vamos a ver un amerizaje tripulado en directo. Gracias, John, por sumarte desde Chile. Gracias, Shaula, desde Tolima, Colombia. Jolulipa pregunta ¿cómo andás, Jolulipa? Saludos. Gracias por sumarte. ¿Se quemará totalmente durante el descenso el escudo de abajo? No se quema, no se quema por completo. De hecho, el escudo queda intacto. El escudo soporta esa temperatura, ¿sí? El escudo soporta esa temperatura y son los zetas, ¿sí? Y de un lado del escudo está a 1900 grados de temperatura, del otro lado a 0. No pasa la temperatura, es un escudo ablativo absolutamente aislante para soportar esas temperaturas. Saludos, Esteban, desde Los Hornos. Saludos, Nor Melgarejo, desde Buenos Aires. Fabio Sánchez, de Colombia. Gracias a todos por sumarte. Es una alegría para nosotros, realmente es muy lindo. Somos casi 1300 personas conectadas entre el canal del Planetario de la Universidad de La Plata y mi canal personal. Gracias por estar ahí. Liber, de Arrueta, desde Bolivia. Bienvenido o bienvenida. Henry Pérez, desde Bucaramanga, Colombia, gracias por estar. Gabriel Antonio Sánchez, desde Venezuela. Brother 307 pregunta cómo aterrizan las Soyuz. Aterrizan con paracaídas, ¿sí? En la estepa rusa, cerca de Kazajstán. Bajan con paracaídas y 5 metros antes de que la cápsula toque el suelo, se encienden unos retrocohetes con un disparo muy fuerte que hace que casi la frene a seco. Pero golpean con la Tierra. Es un descenso un poco más violento, si se quiere, que lo que puede ser un amerizaje. De todas maneras, el amerizaje, por más que caigan con paracaídas, es un golpe, ¿eh? Es un golpe muy grande. Por eso los astronautas están perfectamente sujetos a sus asientos y no solo están bien sujetos, sino que los asientos esto ocurre en todos los programas espaciales, los asientos están diseñados para su fisonomía. Los asientos son ergonómicos, adaptados obviamente a cada uno de los astronautas. Sotil desde Honduras. Bienvenido. Jorge Moscoso desde Colombia. Abel Martínez desde Paraguay. Ali Barcelona desde Santa Fe. Siempre presente. Gracias, Ali. Felipe Agustín desde León, Guanajuato, México. Bueno, van a descender cerquita tuyo, Felipe. Comparado con nosotros, van a estar ahí, descendiendo en el Golfo de México, ¿sí? Esta es la zona de descenso. Acá tenemos el Golfo de México, ¿sí? Aquí está nuestro amigo en Guanajuato. Este es el Golfo de México. Aquí está el Centro Espacial Kennedy, desde donde despegó hace 6 meses la Crew Dragon Endeavour, y a la zona de amerizaje será acá, en la costa de Pensacola. Se había pensado también en Panama City, aquí cerca. Finalmente decidieron como primera opción Pensacola. En 2 minutos tienen que reingresar a la atmósfera. Bueno, viene la parte más importante, podríamos decir, de la misión. Estaremos atentos. Quisiera saber que me confirmen si ustedes escuchan el sonido en vivo desde la NASA. ¿Me pueden confirmar si escuchan el sonido? Ok. En este momento vamos a cambiar para que puedan escuchar el sonido. Confírmenme si ahora lo pueden escuchar, por favor. Aguanten un minuto que ahora no están hablando. Ya tienen que estar reingresando en la atmósfera, de acuerdo al tiempo.
And just about 2 minutes after we get acquisition of signal, AOS, back with Dragon, we're going to be looking for those parachutes. And we should hopefully be getting some views from a couple of our assets out at the landing zone, including our WB-57 high-altitude research plane, which is going to be relying on Dragon's telemetry to actually lock onto it in the sky and give us an infrared view of the capsule during the final stages of re-entry. We're going to be looking for the drogue deploys at about 44 minutes after the hour. Those will be 2 drogue shoots that are going to come out when the vehicle is still moving at about 350 miles an hour. And it'll be at an altitude of about 18,000 feet. They'll come out and do some initial slowing and stabilization of the spacecraft. And then less than a minute later, they'll detach and the 4 main parachutes will deploy.
A las 15:42 tendríamos que estar recibiendo nuevamente la comunicación de los astronautas. Esperemos que así sea.
Those main parachutes will come out at an altitude of about 6,500 feet, with Dragon already slowed down to 119 miles an hour. And they'll do the rest of the slowing the whole way down until we splash down in the Gulf of Mexico. We should be 10 minutes away from splashdown.
Estamos en esa ventana de 6 minutos en donde no hay comunicación y en cualquier momento aparecerán las imágenes de los telescopios tomando a la nave cayendo a través de la atmósfera en el cielo del Golfo de México. Les puedo asegurar que estoy muy ansioso y nervioso también.
About 3 minutes left, little less than 3 minutes until we anticipate reacquiring our signal.
Ya van 3 minutos.
Connection with Bob and Doug in the Dragon spacecraft.
If you're just tuning in, we are in a blackout period.
Faltan otros 3 minutos.
We were expecting. This blackout period will last a total
Cualquier
of 6
momento vamos a
minutes, and
tener
we're about
imágenes
halfway through there now. At
de
the
la
moment,
cápsula ingresando.
Dragon is re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, and due to the plasma building up on the exterior of the vehicle, we're unable to communicate or send commands, but Dragon is fully autonomous. It is steering itself, and right now Bob and Doug are flying home.
Estamos a 1 minuto y medio, 2 minutos de recobrar la comunicación. A las 15:42 se tendría que recobrar.
Dragon SpaceX, com check.
Están llamando a los astronautas para ver si pueden recibir información. Todavía estamos dentro de esos 6 minutos.
Anticipated blackout window. It does look like we are getting maybe some sporadic data starting to peek through. This is why you heard that communications check with the spacecraft.
Dragon SpaceX, com check.
Siguen llamando.
Denver has you loud and clear. We're about 3.9 G.
Vamos.
Copy, we've got you
Muy bien.
5 as well, Doug. Looking
Muy
good,
bien.
and you can expect an automated chute deployment.
Ahí se pudieron comunicar. Qué alegría.
Copy.
Qué alegría. Qué alegría.
All right, really good news there. We have come out of the blackout period and we have
Acaban de
established
comunicarse.
connection with Dragon Endeavour, with
Está todo
NASA
muy bien.
astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley on board.
Y esperemos ya las primeras señales.
We were able to
De la nave.
reacquire that communication a little bit earlier than expected. And now we are just waiting. We should just be about 2.5 minutes away from that initial drogue chute deploy.
Yeah, 2 minutes and 26 seconds.
A GPS has converged.
15:44 se tiene que abrir el primer set de paracaídas.
You may have heard earlier that Bob and Doug are currently experiencing
Estamos a 1 minuto, 1 minuto y
3.5
medio.
Gs. Not too bad. That's about what they pulled during the ascent phase. Just like a mild roller coaster.
Mucha ansiedad, por cierto. Pero bueno, fue fundamental el poder recibir la
The
comunicación de
vehicle is
ellos.
now
Están
over the
bien.
Gulf of Mexico.
La nave soportó esa
It is
reentrada.
approaching
Es la
the
parte más
landing zone,
crítica
off the
de una
coast of Florida,
misión.
near Pensacola. And there we have
Ahí
our
ya
first
tenemos la
shot.
primera imagen. Ahí ya tenemos la primera imagen de la
There it is.
Dragon
This-
Endeavour.
The first view from the WB-57 airplane. It is dipping in and out a little bit. This is going to be an infrared camera showing us Dragon re-entering. We have that comm back with Bob and Doug. You heard 8 GPS is converging. Dragon has 3 GPS units that it uses actually in the parachute deployment process as it helps, along with the pressure sensors, really give a solid altitude to the flight computers on when these are supposed to deploy.
Falta una etapa crítica que es la apertura de los paracaídas.
We're standing by for the drogue chute deployments. We should be just under
Estamos a
5
segundos de la
minutes
apertura del
away
primer set de
from
paracaídas.
splashdown.
Passing 15 kilometers, brace for drogue window.
Copy. We're braced.
Just about 14 kilometers in altitude, 8.4 miles, continuing to descend.
A
Here on the
14
screen,
kilómetros
we
de
have a
altura
shot
se
of the
encuentran.
capsule as it is preparing to deploy those initial parachutes, the drogue parachutes. Again, these parachutes help slow the vehicle down
La primera apertura se producirá a
Even
los
further,
5 kilómetros y
and
medio
help
de altura.
stabilize in preparation for main
Caen
chute
muy rápido,
deployment.
por cierto. Ahí ya se ve la forma de cono de la nave. Fíjense lo negro.
Right about now, the
que está-
capsule is going about 400 miles per hour, decelerating quickly.
400 miles per hour, algo así como casi 600 kilómetros por hora. Está
And standing
cayendo.
by for drogue deploys.
Ya se tienen que abrir el primer set de paracaídas.
Visual, 2 drogues
Ahí
out.
se abrieron los primeros dos.
There on your screen, we have visual
Muy bien.
confirmation of those 2 drogue deployments.
Happy to drogue.
All right, so 2 of
Y un
2
minuto
of the
después,
drogues
ahí se ven
now out. They're
claritos.
gonna do
Un
their
minuto después se abrirán los
slowing and
4.
stabilizing of the Dragon spacecraft. They should be detaching in just a few moments.
Esos
and
dos
then we'll see
paracaídas están
4
estabilizando la
parachutes,
nave.
the main
Primero que
parachutes
aminoran la
deployed.
velocidad, pero aparte
Dragon
la
under
estabilizan.
drogues.
Ahora ya se van a tener que abrir los 4 principales.
So the expected descent rate, the expected velocity under the drogues nominal, we're right at around 150
La velocidad es
miles
de
an
acuerdo a
hour
la
and already
programada.
dropping.
Y ahí se abren
You
los
see
4.
the drogues now
Muy bien.
detach.
Vamos.
And there we have
Vamos,
confirmation
fundamental.
of deployment of the 4 main parachutes.
Ahí se abrieron los 4 paracaídas
We are
principales.
visual on 4 chutes out.
Maravilloso.
We are visual. 4 main parachutes deployed.
Maravilloso. Muy bien. Vamos. Muy contento me encuentro, por cierto. No sé si se nota, pero es fundamental esa apertura.
So at this point, the main parachutes have deployed. They are inflating, as you can see there on your screen, continuing to slow Dragon down significantly. We are anticipating splashdown in just under 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
En 2 minutos y
And we've
30
already slowed the
segundos
vehicle down to about
estará
16
tocando
miles
el
an
agua del
hour.
Golfo de
It's already
México,
less than a
en la costa de
kilometer in
Pensacola.
altitude.
Main chute descent rate nominal, passing through 700 meters.
So at this point, Dragon
Todo
has
es
saved all
nominal, como
propulsion
acaban
systems
de
on
escuchar,
board.
es decir, todo está en orden, todo está correcto. 600
And we're
metros,
600 meters above
600
the
metros de
Gulf of
altura.
Mexico.
Should be approximately a minute 30 from splashdown.
Mission control team here in Hawthorne has reported the precise landing coordinates to the recovery team. They are standing by, ready to go get our space dads.
100 meters.
We just passed about 300 meters. 1 minute till
300 metros
splashdown.
de altura.
200 meters.
200 metros.
We are braced for splashdown.
Copy, brace for splashdown.
So there we heard Bob and Doug reporting that they are bracing for a splashdown. We should be able to see the Gulf of Mexico here in the shot.
Una
just
increíble misión lo que
as we're now
han,
just about 20 meters
lo que han
off
logrado.
the ocean.
Una empresa privada es asombroso. Y ahí llega.
Splashdown.
Muy
As you
bien,
can see on
muy
your
bien.
screen, we have visual confirmation for
Impresionante.
splashdown.
Qué alegría, qué alegría. Hay 2 personas adentro. No es menos, no es para menos.
Dragon Endeavour has returned home. NASA astronauts Bob and Doug
Luego de 64 días de misión, ya están en el mar. Ahí van los botes.
It was truly our honor and privilege to fly in flight of the Crew Dragon and Endeavour. Congratulations, everybody at SPACEX.
Los astronautas que están comunicándose y saludando y agradeciéndoles a todos. Muchas gracias, Hugo, por tu super chat. Touchdown. Nunca mejor dicho. Gracias por tu super chat.
4.800.
So great news all around
Saludos,
there.
Hugo.
Our
Si algún
space
día
dads are
andas,
back on Earth
estás en California,
after
si
a
algún día andas por
19-hour
Hawthorne,
return journey from space. Dragon Endeavour
nos
has played
sacás unas fotos de
splashdown in
SpaceX y
the
nos las
Gulf
mandás
of
para
Mexico,
compartir.
just off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. And on your screen there, you can see our two fast boats, and they are indeed fast, racing out to greet Dragon Endeavour as it sits there. The first.
Ahí están, a la izquierda, Hurley,
Bob and Doug looking good.
Doug,
Hurley
y a la derecha Bob Behnken. Están muy tranquilos. Es una alegría muy grande porque independientemente de la empresa, de un país, de un programa, son dos seres humanos que de chico habrán soñado con viajar al espacio y participaron de una misión histórica y terminó todo muy bien. Y eso es para alegrarse siempre. Ahí se están acercando los dos botes que van a llevar la nave al Go Navigator, el barco de SpaceX. Víctor Santos, saludos desde Houston, Texas. ¡Wow! ¡Qué lugar! La historia del vuelo espacial se encuentra ahí. Muchas gracias por sumarte.
1848 UTC. Bob and Doug now in the water, and the recovery.
Sí, claro, Juan Daniel Domínguez, un saludo para todos mis coterráneos, los tandilenses. Me encuentro acá en Tandil, transmitimos desde acá, desde el centro de Tandil.
With Bob and Doug and the team here in Hawthorne. Pretty soon we should be getting the go for them to move in.
Gracias a todos por estar ahí, más de 1.700 personas, casi 1.800 conectadas entre el canal del Planetario de la Universidad de La Plata y mi canal.
Yeah, those fast boats will be moving in to do a couple of things. They'll be performing what's known as a sniffer test. That's essentially to ensure that the air around the vehicle doesn't have any toxic fumes from the hypergolic propellants on board. So once we get the all clear from there, the water recovery lead will give the go for approach, and that's when the first fast boat will actually approach the capsule. Hopefully give a little wave to Bob and Doug.
Jorge Diaro García desde Córdoba, contento, seguro que compartimos la felicidad desde ya. Martín, mandame un saludo. Bueno, saludos Martín. Saludos Andrés Flores desde Panamá. Gracias Leandro por tu comentario. Esa es una imagen tomada desde un avión.
From up above. You can see the 4 parachutes in the water.
Y los 4 paracaídas en el mar. Les recordamos que están en el Golfo de México, sobre la costa de Pensacola.
They're going to stay in their suits, in their seats. We're waiting for all these initial checks.
Dragon, SpaceX, ComCheck.
Loud and clear, hello.
Cuando ustedes escuchan el ComCheck es de communication chequeo, o sea, el chequeo de que la comunicación es correcta. Dice Alina, Barcelona, qué momento para estar vivos. Y lo que se viene, Alina, los años que se vienen. Yo creo que se vienen los mejores años de la exploración espacial tripulada. Muchos, entre los que me incluyo, no vimos los años del Apolo, pero vamos a ver años tan o más intensos. José Luis, saludos de Castilla-La Mancha, en España. Leandro García Gil, desde Córdoba, saludos. Julina Elizabeth, saludos, que se encuentra en Fernando Rafael de Arequipa, en Perú. Rodrigo Abril en Bogotá, Colombia. Amigos de toda América y de España.
And they can let the flight surgeons know that all is well inside Dragon Endeavour.
All right, and it sounds like we do have one of our folks that's on location there with the recovery forces, NASA's Brandy Dean. She's joining us by satellite phone. Brandy, if you can
Carlos
hear me.
Me pregunta sobre mi formación. Soy astrónomo, Carlos. Estudié astronomía en la Facultad de Ciencias Astronómicas y Geofísicas de la Universidad Nacional de La Plata. En Argentina hay 3 universidades donde podés estudiar astronomía. La Universidad de La Plata, donde yo estudié, la Universidad Nacional de Córdoba y la Universidad Nacional de San Juan. Ya están bastante cerca los dos botes de la Dragon Endeavour.
I can hear you, but they're good.
Ezequiel Lasta, gran periodista de La Plata. Saludos, Ezequiel, gracias por estar. Miles de personas conectadas a ambos canales. Es una alegría muy grande para nosotros. Les recordamos que dentro de un mes aproximadamente vamos a estar transmitiendo, o menos de un mes, porque está programado para fines de agosto. Vamos a estar transmitiendo el lanzamiento, algo más cercano a nuestro corazón, a los argentinos, el lanzamiento del SAOCOM 1B, el satélite argentino, el primero construido con tecnología radar y el más importante en su tipo del mundo. Orgullo para la ciencia y la tecnología argentina. Vamos a estar transmitiendo ese lanzamiento. Y en septiembre nos tocará transmitir el lanzamiento de la primer misión de SpaceX operativa. Esta fue una demostración, la Demo 2, la primer tripulada. En septiembre será la primera operativa. Vamos a estar también transmitiéndolo. Será ya con 4 tripulantes, en lugar de 2 como fue esta vez.
Any traces of hypergalls. The second one's going to start rounding up the parachutes.
Ahí ya se está acercando uno de los primeros botes.
From the WV-57 still flying overhead, looking down. You can
desde
see
el
the
avión
parachutes
que
in the water,
está
and the second boat start to gather
navegando
up.
el cielo del Golfo de
We'll try one
México.
more time real quick. We have NASA's Brandy Dean out with the recovery forces. Brandy, if you can hear me, what was it like to watch this Dragon come down under parachutes?
Oh, it was amazing. I wish everybody could have had my view. It was such beautiful sight.
La primera vez que esto ocurre en 45 años, la última vez fue en 1975, con el regreso de el Apolo en la misión Apolo-Soyuz. Muchas gracias, María Mercedes Yarza, por tu super sticker.
That's incredible.
Gracias por apoyar el canal.
From people if you'd be able to hear the sonic boom, and we weren't sure. So I'm really glad you just answered that for us. I mean, we talked so much about.
Gracias, Batigol. Me suena que sos argentino. Estás en Sinaloa, en México, pero me suena que sos argentino, Batigol. Saludos.
Clear skies and clear seas the whole way.
Desde Badajoz, Jorge, en España. Nechita, en Ecuador.
I'm not sure if you can hear me right now, but I think you're asking about the weather with clear skies. There are just kind of a circle of flat.
Miguel Ángel Gauna, desde La Plata, mi querida La Plata. Saludos.
We were able to see the parachutes far above.
Desde Buenos Aires, en San Justo, Esteban Naus. Saludos, Esteban.
All right, well, we're not getting any views on the boat, so what kind of activities take place
Gerson
right now? We're
Morillo,
able to see the
perteneciente
fast boats
al
approaching the
Centro
castle.
de
What's everybody
Investigaciones
doing on the boat
Astronómicas
to
en
just kind of get
Venezuela.
everything
Saludos,
ready?
Gerson.
The boat's also making its way to the castle. I can't see it with my mirror. Yeah, but we're getting closer. Everybody's been kind of standing by, holding ready positions for quite a while now. So as soon as it
Mariana Fresco, en Paratinga, Brasil. Saludos.
their own activities.
Adriana Goñi,
All right, copy that.
querida
Well,
amiga,
we're gonna
gracias
keep
por estar,
watching
Adri.
from here.
Abrazo enorme.
Thanks for calling in.
De
and
todos los lugares,
thanks for
de
being
todos
out
los
there with
lugares siguiendo la
everybody and getting us
transmisión.
These great views. It's really incredible. Thanks, Brandy. Hope
Momento histórico realmente. Con esto SpaceX se posiciona de una manera, yo diría, privilegiada en lo que es la exploración espacial. Tengan en cuenta que es la primera misión en toda la historia de todos los países que la gestiona directamente una empresa privada. Siempre los astronautas de cualquier nacionalidad han ido al espacio a partir de agencias espaciales estatales. Esta es la primera vez que una agencia espacial privada desarrolla el cohete, desarrolla la nave, desarrolla la logística y gestiona todo el control de misión, desde el mismísimo despegue hasta el amerizaje en este caso. Estamos viviendo un hecho histórico. En los libros quedará que esta fue la primera vez en la historia que una empresa privada manejó toda una misión espacial tripulada. Gracias, Toto. Muchísimas gracias por tu super chat.
Climbing on top of an oddly shaped thing in the ocean could be a little tricky. So this person has undergone hours and hours of training and certification in order to perform this very important task. There on the right-hand side of your screen, we see the second fast boat approaching. Of course, both of these boats needed to wait for their cue from the water recovery lead in order to approach Dragon after splashdown. Again, that was just to make sure that there weren't any toxic vapors in the air. And now that they got the all clear, we do see
amarrando a la cápsula. Tengan en cuenta que los astronautas no van a salir de ahí. La cápsula va a ser llevada hasta el barco Go Navigator de SpaceX, y una vez que la nave esté arriba del barco, recién ahí se va a abrir la escotilla y los astronautas van a bajar.
This is a view from the main recovery vessel, which was still a few miles away from the splashdown point.
SpaceX, we have hypergol sweeps and unfired ordnance checks nominal. Rigger is on board the vehicle. About 5 minutes until capsule lift.
After that, yeah, we see them walking outside, and good news.
All right, confirmation there that all of those hypergolic vapor tests came out positive, or rather negative, which is a positive thing. So the team was able to approach, and now the crew member that is installing the rigging is on top of the capsule. It's difficult to see there because the slower vessel, the primary recovery ship, is a little further away. But as we heard, it's just a mere 2.5 minutes until they will be hoisted out of the water. I'm sorry, 25 minutes, not 2.5. I misheard that.
Yeah, they're fast, but they're not that fast. We also have been hearing that the secondary boat, which its primary mission in this case is securing those parachutes, they've already got buoys attached to both drogues, and two of the four mains already had eyes on the other two, so they're moving through that.
Gracias, Walter, por tu comentario.
Again, their primary responsibility getting those parachutes together.
Un abrazo para Juan Luis Tórtola desde Barcelona, la hermosa Barcelona.
Right before the deployment of the mains automatically detaching immediately as Dragon detected splashdown. All of that happening right per the timeline.
La poca calidad de las imágenes, Juan Luis, se debe a que están tomando una imagen desde un barco a muchísima distancia. No tienen, no es un estudio de televisión, digamos. Eso que estás viendo ahí está a muchísima distancia del barco principal. Al contrario, yo creo que se ve bastante bien. Y encima en el mar, donde todo se mueve. Gracias, Walter. Sería bueno que se dé. Saludos, Fabián, de Hurlingham. Desde Flores, Búho de Minerva. Saludos. A J. Maraer, desde... ahí se me perdió. Desde El Salvador. Saludos, saludos. Gracias por sumarte. Desde Quilmes, Gabriel Barrio Nuevo. Saludos a vos y a tu padre. ¿Por qué es tan importante que una empresa privada logre esto, Giselle? Porque de esa manera se democratiza el acceso al espacio. El acceder al espacio no queda solamente en manos de una agencia espacial, como puede ser la NASA en los Estados Unidos, o Roscosmos en Rusia, o los mismos chinos. El juego se abre para todos, y cuando el juego se abre, es mejor para todos. Esa es la virtud de la competencia. Y que una empresa privada logre esto significa que se van a acelerar los programas espaciales tripulados. Estamos a muy poquitos años de ver el regreso del hombre y de la primera mujer de caminar en la Luna. Y esto se debe a el avance que se está logrando en esta materia. Gracias, Esteban, por tu comentario. Saludos de Rosario, Julián Moreno. Desde Bogotá, Colombia, Marcela. Desde General Rodríguez, Anastasia, saludos. Silvana dice, ¿los astronautas van a hacer cuarentena? No, no creo. No creo. De hecho, llegan sanitos, han estado en el espacio. Y lo primero que van a hacer luego de una serie de chequeos y el trabajo que implica informar de todo lo sucedido va a ser reunirse con su familia desde ya. José Vivaldini, saludos de Brasil. Desde Tijuana, México, Maritaré, saludos. Desde Rosario, Argentina, Mónica Dielefol. Miren lo oscura que está la nave, ¿sí? La Dragon Endeavour, lo oscura que está. Eso todo negro que ven, la nave es blanca, como pueden ver en la parte superior, en el cono. el cono que se abre justamente para poder acoplarse a la Estación Espacial Internacional. Gracias, Toto.
So at this point,
Gracias
we're at about 22 minutes until Dragon will be lifted onto the recovery vessel.
Por tu super chat. La nave es blanca y todo lo oscuro, ¿sí? Es por el hollín que se produce con la incineración en el momento en que
Bob and
regresa a
Doug
la
are still
atmósfera.
strapped into their seats.
Si no tuviesen ese escudo
Kind of like an
protector, no
airplane,
podrían
and they
regresar
say,
sanos y
Do not
salvos.
unbuckle your seatbelt until the captain determines that it's safe to do so. They will remain in their seats throughout the entire recovery
Mario
process,
González, bienvenidos a casa, ya
essentially
lo
until
creo.
it's time to get them out.
José Eduardo, saludos de Neuquén, gracias por sumarte. Saludos desde Perú, Lima, a Cecilia
Like I
Viviana.
said, we are expecting to
Bienvenida.
lift Dragon onto the Go Navigator recovery
Gracias,
ship
Silvana,
in
por
about
tu
21
mensaje.
minutes.
Saludos de Gorbea, Chile.
And then in 28 minutes, we will be opening that hatch,
Me perdí el amigo que estaba
And
saludando
beginning
desde
crew
Chile, Sandra,
egress.
Sandra San Martín.
also known as exit.
And we did hear the rigging is pretty much complete. So
Desde Capilla del Señor,
right
Emiliano
as
Ríos,
they
gracias Emiliano.
arrive there at the capsule, the main recovery vessel will be able to
Ahí ya
begin,
tenemos una imagen más
getting it
cercana,
out of the
porque
water.
claro, se está acercando justamente el barco, el Go Navigator.
So now as the recovery vessel Go Navigator is getting closer to Dragon, Dragon's
Les voy a
position
buscar una
there off the
imagen
coast
del
of
Go
Pensacola,
Navigator.
Florida, we're able to see the capsule in a little bit more detail. It is
Pero voy a
certainly no
perder
longer
el sonido. No quiero que pierdan el
bright shade of
sonido
white.
original. Vamos a dejarlo ahí.
like we said, those
Saludos de
external
Colombia, Miguel.
temperatures
Riquet.
were reaching up to 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. So the thermal protection
Maurín
systems
López, desde Honduras.
enable Dragon to return
Desde
while keeping
Espeleta,
the
Adrián Celaya, gracias
internal
Adrián por
temperature
sumarte.
rather temperate.
Miles de personas en ambos canales, muchísimas gracias
You
por
are seeing
sumarse.
a few more boats than expected.
Mauricio Chacón,
the team's currently
Pachón,
working,
gracias,
with
gracias
a
amigo
few
por
private
el
vessels,
super chat.
In the area,
Gracias por
making
apoyar el
sure that
canal.
they get out of there.
Mauricio Chacón, que se encuentra en Ibagué, Colombia, de parte de todos los integrantes e invitados de Shaula, grupo de bioastronomía. Interesante tema. Gracias, Mauricio. Ya tenemos una imagen mucho más cercana. Notable la quemazón. Ahí pueden ver sobre la izquierda a uno de
And now we
los
see one of the
operarios,
SpaceX fast
¿sí?
boats moving in.
Con su casco amarillo. Con eso también pueden ver el tamaño de la nave, ¿no? La nave tiene unos 5 metros de alto por unos 4 metros de ancho en su parte inferior.
So we are being advised that the recovery team is radioing out to the vessels in the water near Crew Dragon to vacate the area so that we're able to extract Bob and Doug safely. Also for the safety of those folks in the area as well, not just Bob and Doug.
Desde San Juan, Argentina,
Yeah,
nos
this
saluda
is
Juan Pablo
obviously
Conti.
a dynamic
Gracias por sumarte.
operation.
Saludos.
One of the first things we do is make sure there aren't essentially poisonous fumes around
Leandro
the capsule.
García Gil, desde Colombia.
Something
Saludos,
like
Leandro.
this just really can endanger the whole thing, endanger the crew members and endanger themselves. So the SpaceX team's moving.
Dice
in to try and
Candelaria,
get
Diego,
them
¿qué impacto
away
ecológico
so
tiene
they
este
can
amerizaje?
safely
Ninguno,
recover the
ninguno,
Dragon
Candelaria.
capsule
Es
and get Bob and Doug on deck and
una
safely
piedrita
inside their
en un
medical
mar.
quarters.
No
So
existe.
we can see them, they're getting a lot closer.
No existe
We
ningún
expect,
impacto
about
ecológico.
10 minutes or so until they should be in position. All the rigging has been affixed on the Dragon capsule. And once they arrive, they'll be able to use that hydraulic lift to get Dragon up and out of the water.
Bueno, Toto Pastore también nos saluda, fanático de estos temas. futuro gran aviador.
So the recovery vessel
Saludos,
Go
Toto.
Navigator is getting closer and closer to Dragon Endeavour.
¿Cuándo los sacan? Preguntaba ahí
As it awaits,
Sol García Levachi. ¿Cuándo los sacan? Los van a
its
sacar
recovery,
cuando esa
or
nave
as
la
it
lleven
awaits to be hoisted
al
out
barco,
of
al
the
Go
Gulf of
Navigator.
Mexico.
El
Again,
barco
we
la
landed
va
just
a
off the
levantar
coast of
con una
Florida,
grúa y la
near
va a depositar
Pensacola.
arriba en su cubierta. Una vez que
Maybe
esté
next
arriba de
time
la
we
cubierta
shouldn't
saldrán los
announce our
astronautas.
landing zone. Oh, there we got a shot from our WB-57 plane. It looks like
Mandame un
that area has
saludo,
cleared
soy
out
de
significantly,
Pedro Luro,
so that is good to
Argentina.
see.
Nos saluda Jessica Román. Saludo, Jessica.
And we're also hearing that all of the parachutes
Pregunta
have
Leandro
buoys
si
on
ya la van a
them, so
alzar cuando
also good
llegue.
news,
Cuando llegue el barco grande,
as
cuando
the
llegue el
recovery
barco del Go
process
Navigator,
continues
se va a
for
proceder a
SpaceX Demo
levantarla.
2.
Desde Wilde Avellaneda nos saluda Karina Atanasio. Gracias por tu
Tracking
saludo,
SpaceX
Karina.
for Comrie config.
Gracias por estar.
Go ahead, Mike.
Hey Doug, we're about to
Gaby,
reconfigure the
Gabrielita y
forward
Jeffrey
link.
Joseph.
We may lose that for
Saludos.
about 1 or so
Gracias por
minutes,
estar en
and that should
familia
happen
viendo esta
shortly.
transmisión.
Copy. Yeah, just give us a call back when you think you got it back.
Dice Claudia, ¿por qué tardan tanto? Yo te puedo asegurar que tardan muy poco, Claudia. Muy poco tardan. Es todo un proceso. Están volviendo del espacio. No es algo sencillo. Se tiene que acercar un barco. Vos ten en cuenta que vienen del espacio y pueden apuntar prácticamente
So as
al
the main
metro
vessel gets
el
closer,
lugar
it's
del
going to back
descenso.
up and get its hydraulic lift set up right next to the Dragon
Es
capsule,
increíble
still
lo
in
que
the
hace.
water. Bob and Doug still inside.
Tiene que
Just
acercarse al
waiting for that
barco,
recovery.
levantar
We
la
should
nave.
start
¿Para
the
qué
hoisting
apurarse?
operations in the next 10 to 15
No tiene
minutes.
sentido apurarse.
And
Puede
then
ser
it'll be a
peligroso.
pretty quick lift up out of the water using that hydraulic lift into the Dragon nest on the deck of the boat. or the
José,
ship, rather.
Padrón,
And then they'll move it
Josecito.
underneath the helipad into essentially the crew recovery area where they'll have a
Saludos.
platform right up to the hatch. They'll be able to open up the hatch. SpaceX medical doctor will be the
Pregunta
first one
José
through
si
the
se
door,
sacan
able to do
los
a quick
paracaídas
check-in with
antes
Bob and Doug on their
de
status,
remolcarlas.
and
Sí,
then
exactamente.
he
De hecho,
and the
ya han
other
desenganchado los
medical
paracaídas.
doctors, flight surgeons,
Antes de
and,
desenganchar los
trained technicians
paracaídas,
will be able to
obviamente
help them
enganchan
out
la
of the
cápsula
capsule.
a los dos botes
Yeah, earlier,
auxiliares.
just after
Una vez que la
splashdown, we
cápsula
did
está
hear,
enganchada a los dos
Bob and
botes
Doug report
auxiliares,
that they were feeling
recién ahí
good
desenganchan
after
los
reentry, so
paracaídas.
that was relayed to the flight surgeon.
Miguel Ángel
And good news to
Urmeneta,
hear.
saludos desde Mendoza.
Again, this is a view coming from the WB-57 plane as it is circling the area. And we can see Dragon awaiting to be pulled out
Desde
of the
Paraguay,
water.
Axio Rolón. Desde Panamá,
Again, we are anticipating that lift to begin in just under 15 minutes. We're approaching 14 minutes here.
pregunta Leandro
And
García si la
then
cápsula puede ser reutilizada en otra
21
misión. Sí,
minutes,
puede ser reutilizada en
we
otra
will
misión. De hecho,
an
esa
open
es una de las
hatch.
grandes ventajas que ha
You
logrado
can see the main
SpaceX,
recovery
reutilizar
vessel in the top right there. That's the
cápsulas y
helipad
cohetes.
with,
Ahí está el
the
Go
big
Navigator,
SpaceX
ahí lo
X
pueden
on
ver.
top.
Al centro de la
Now backing
imagen,
up towards the
al
capsule.
centro de la imagen pueden ver
Certainly not to be confused
La-
with one of our
la Dragon
landing
Endeavour
drone
y a la
ships.
derecha el barco Go Navigator. Fíjense todos los barcos auxiliares que hay al costado.
There's
Ahí,
a
ahí
live
ya tenemos
view
imágenes
of
del Go
Dragon,
Navigator.
of Dragon floating in the water there in the background, along with many onlookers. Certainly from a safer
Y ahí ya la
distance
están
at this point.
trayendo.
This is a live
Los
shot
botes.
coming from Go
Estamos a
Navigator, our primary
minutos de
recovery
ver
vessel here.
el
So
descenso
it's
de
Crew Dragon is
Doug
also
y de
accompanied
Bob.
by the fast boats that are helping to bring it in closer. And there you can see a couple of the recovery team
Juan
members.
Carlos pregunta si los
on the
paracaídas
deck,
son reutilizables. Sí,
and
son
also just behind
reutilizables,
them,
Juan Carlos.
we
Por
get our
supuesto que
first
pasan
good
por
view
una
of the
inspección,
nest.
¿no? Desde
Yes,
ya.
so this is,
Sufren mucho, de hecho.
essentially the nest in
Pero
the
sí,
background
si están
there.
en
Dragon will
condiciones,
be
los
hoisted
reutilizan.
using the hydraulic lift out of the water and into that nest. That nest will then be pulled towards the camera from this view, towards those individuals on
En el
that upper deck
regreso,
there. And that's
Miguel
where
Riquet es
the
solo caída
SpaceX
libre.
com check.
Bueno, gracias, Toto, por otro,
Loud and clear.
por otro
Solo
super
how
chat. Te agradezco.
Loud and clear as well, and from the video, it looks like the boat is about one length away. About
Preguntaban
5 to
por
10
el
meters
regreso
backing up to you.
y el combustible. El combustible es usado para frenar la nave cuando está en órbita. Frenan a determinada velocidad, cosa de que la gravedad terrestre gane y empiece a
Alright, so good
traerla.
news
Y una vez
there. We're
que
getting ready to
empieza a
see
caer,
Dragon to be lifted out of the water
ya no
and
enciende
into
ningún
the
motor.
recovery nest. As I was saying, that nest will be pulled towards the camera.
Solo al inicio
towards the
para
upper deck that we saw
orientarse
there, and
y
that's
luego
where
ya es una
the
caída
medical stretchers will be
libre.
waiting to assist them into the medical bays for evaluation after capsule
Saludos
egress.
italiano a vos y a tu hijo.
It's already been 25 minutes since they splashed down. It doesn't feel like it.
That
but
was definitely the fastest 25
Yeah.
minutes of the day.
the timeline we were anticipating was for the lifting operations to start within about 30 minutes. So we're pretty much right on the timeline still. That's been a pretty common thing so far today. You can see them with one of the fast boats getting it positioned to start moving out with the additional rigging to affix to the Dragon capsule, where they're going to use this A-frame
Gracias,
to pull
Dick.
it up out of the
Saludos
water.
a
You
ti
can see the
y
Dragon
a,
nest at the very bottom. It's that
y a
circular
tu hijo
object with
desde
the
Caracas.
A1 right on it.
Saludos para Arnau,
So while this is the first time
el hijo
we
de Cristina,
are recovering a capsule with
10
crew members
añitos,
on board,
futuro
the recovery
astrofísico.
team has been
And Dragon, just letting you know, we got a couple
Qué
lines
bueno,
connected,
qué bueno,
and
Arnau.
rigging is in
Bueno,
progress.
a seguir leyendo, a seguir estudiando y a seguir la pasión de uno. Eso es fundamental, seguir la pasión de
all right
uno.
there. So
Si
just
seguís tu
updating
pasión,
the crew that they
te va a ir
might
muy bien.
feel some momentum as the lines, as a couple of the rigging lines are attached. There we can actually, there's our first good shot of the individual who
Javier
is
Herrera,
placing
en
that
embarcación,
rigging
Salta.
equipment. Again, that's someone that's
Saludos.
highly specialized and
Desde allí nos
very
escribe
well
también
trained for
Mariana
these
Rodríguez.
operations. As I was saying, the recovery team has rehearsed and practiced this with Bob and Doug themselves, actually, in a test capsule, practicing the egress as well as they have recovered.
Mercedes y Juan
or excuse
Pedro
me,
de
they have
Tandil,
practiced the recovery
saludos.
process
Bueno,
many times.
ya está
and
cerquita,
actually,
ya está cerquita la
through those
Dragon
practice runs,
Endeavor
they have effectively
de,
cut the recovery
de
period
subirse,
in half
¿sí? De
from the
subirse
initial
al,
Demo 1 mission.
al Go Navigator, al barco.
It's really nice to see that the process itself, after being rehearsed and carefully choreographed, is going super efficiently. Again, safety is the #1 priority, so making sure that only personnel involved in active recovery operations
Como
are
pueden
present
ver,
on
tienen
the
una
deck.
especie de
You may have heard us mention
circunferencia de
before that
goma
there
o
are
algo
about
por el
40 people on
estilo
board today,
para que
but
no
we
se
certainly don't
mueva
want
la
anyone
cápsula
in
al
danger
momento de
or to fall
dejarla ahí en la
overboard.
cubierta.
That guy intentionally jumped. Speaking of falling overboard.
We're ready. Thank you.
All right, so the crew was just told in the next 30 seconds, they have the lines affixed, so they're going to start lifting the capsule.
No tengo idea
up
si el muchacho
out of
se
the water.
cayó o se tiró a propósito, pero
And
uno
at
de los
this point, the
operarios se
communication
cayó
we're
al
getting with
agua.
Dragon is
Bueno,
actually
ahí
being
están
routed through the
subiendo
boat
con los
itself
astronautas
at
en
this
el
point.
interior,
So
con Hurley y
there we can see
Behnken
the
en su
lift.
interior.
Dragon is out of the water.
Ahí están
Yeah,
subiendo
so
la
now
Navigator y
Frame's
ahí
gonna
el
start
brazo que
swinging it
se
back.
mueve.
And it's bound right for that nest at the bottom of your screen.
So there we're getting a better shot of all the points in which Dragon is tethered to the hydraulic lift, ensuring that it isn't swinging freely.
Genial.
There we can see
Muy
Dragon
bien.
Endeavor being carefully set down into the recovery nest on top of Go Navigator.
Muy bien. Ahí pueden ver la
Dragon,
escotilla
SpaceX,
de
welcome
frente,
aboard
se
the
está
recovery
viendo una
vessel.
tapa blanca,
Recovery personnel are completing final
chamuscada, por
checks and
cierto.
preparing to translate
Esa es
you
la
to the egress
escotilla
platform.
por donde van a salir.
We happy. Thank you.
Están hablando desde la cabina, que está todo muy
So for
bien.
the first time
Quizás
in
están
2
un poquito
months,
mareados.
NASA
Tengan en cuenta que
astronauts
estuvieron
Bob Behnken and
64
Doug
días
Hurley
sin gravedad.
are on
Y ahora ya
some
están
sort of
sintiendo la
ground.
gravedad
Yes, we can't
terrestre
call it solid
nuevamente.
ground because it is a ship. However, it is the first time that
Justamente
they are
Lina
not
Bedoya pregunta,
in
¿cuánto tiempo
space,
tarda en reponerse
on
los
a
astronautas
rocket
de la
or
ingravidez?
bobbing in the ocean.
Un par de días tienen un entrenamiento físico
So now that they're in the
impresionante.
nest, they're going to start translating
ya-
it forward. And Dragon's going to move
Ahí ya se ve
into
que se
essentially the
está
hangar section underneath that helipad and then up to that recovery platform that we saw a little bit earlier. At that point, the Spacecraft
Preguntan si los
technicians will work
astronautas no
to
se
open up the
bloquean
hatch. As we said
mentalmente
previously, it's a manual
al ver dos
process,
espacios
a couple of different
distintos. No,
attachments
están
you have to engage before the
entrenados.
hatch itself
Un par
can
de
be
horas para
opened. They'll
aclimatarse
get it
nuevamente a
open,
la gravedad de la
and
Tierra
then
y ya está.
SpaceX's Neil Menon will be the first one through the hatchway to check in on Bob and Doug, get their initial health assessment.
Si están en algún tipo de cuarentena, Marcela, no creo que estén en cuarentena. El Go Navigator se nota que empezó a circular por la estela que va dejando. Están yendo hacia la base aérea de la Fuerza Aérea de Estados Unidos en Pensacola. Para los fanáticos de los aviones, de las películas de acción, no sé si se acuerdan a un tal Maverick que volaba en un F-14 en Pensacola, están yendo hacia esa base.
Looking straight out from the center of the boat. So once Dragon is secured in the nest will be translated then forward and closer to the recovery, closer to the position in which we're able to actually.
¿A qué lugar llegaron los dos astronautas? Pregunta Aide Rivera. Llegaron a la costa de Pensacola, en el Golfo de México. Ya están a bordo de el buque, el barco Go Navigator de SpaceX, y están yendo hacia la base que tiene la Fuerza Aérea de Estados Unidos en Pensacola. Los astronautas todavía están adentro de la nave. Así es, Claudia Berra, esa película. Exactamente, Esteban Rodríguez.
Y
vos, Toto, fanático de los aviones, de memoria te debes de conocer esa película. La pandemia hizo que no se viera la segunda edición. Bueno, la veremos el año que viene quizás.
So they are releasing those securing lines from the sides, making sure it is secure from the bottom.
And there we see Dragon moving forward.
Ahí están acercando la nave ya hacia el interior.
That's a Tesla, I would say.
Increíble lo que hacen, impresionante. Miren lo chamuscada que está la nave.
Interesting to see those scorching marks now that we get a really nice up close detail shot of Dragon.
Standing by for the go for side hatch open.
Mucha ansiedad por verlos en el interior.
That rounded square there in the center of the capsule is that side hatch, and on either side are those oval windows.
Dragon SpaceX, stand by for side hatch opening and egress.
Copy, we're ready.
Le dicen que esperen a salir, a que van a abrir la escotilla ahora. Es una cápsula grande, Ryuk, ¿eh? De las tripuladas, es la más grande de todas las que han existido de las tripuladas. Bueno, salvo desde ya el transbordador espacial, dejando de lado el transbordador espacial. Pero de cápsula, el transbordador no era una cápsula, era un orbitador. En cuanto a cápsulas, es la más grande de todas. Tengan en cuenta que son capacidad máxima para 7 tripulantes. Son 5 metros de altura por 4 metros de diámetro en la parte inferior. Saludos, Andrea Bonafini, a vos, a tu esposo, a tu hija. Andrea, Leo y futura científica Ámbar. Muy bien. Me alegro que esto todo esto lo hacemos también por eso, en gran parte, para generar en los más pequeños y en los más jóvenes la pasión por la ciencia y la tecnología. Educación, ciencia y tecnología, los 3 pilares que hacen que una nación se desarrolle. No hay otra. No hay misterios en esto. Fernando Carrillo, saludos desde Panamá. Gracias por estar. Preguntaban por el interior de la nave en cuanto a la temperatura. La temperatura dentro de la nave es normal. Está absolutamente regulada para que los astronautas estén cómodos. Tanto en temperatura como en oxígeno desde ya. José Luis Hernández, saludos. Hola amigo, ¿cómo estás?
So again, we're preparing to open the side hatch, and once that is done, the flight surgeon will pop his head in, do an initial check, see how Bob and Doug are doing.
And Dragon SpaceX, we got a slight
Lola,
delay due to some
hija
potential
de
NDO hits
Sol
near
García
the
Levalle,
side
dice
hatch.
quiere ir a Marte. Yo también, somos dos, varios somos. Varios de los que estamos conectados acá queremos ir a Marte. Pero ella va a tener seguramente más posibilidades que yo. Muy bien, Lola. Hay que estudiar.
And so they're still
Sobre
continuing
todo estudiar
to
lo que
do
te
kind of
guste y
those
seguir
sniffs, so
esa
checking for any
pasión.
vapors or anything. So those NDO, it's NO2 nitrogen dioxide, primarily can get detected in the air from the burning of fuel. So they're going to continue to just inspect around the capsule, make sure that it's, again, safe for the crew, safe for the recovery experts before they get this hatch open. But again, moving right
El
along
lugar
the
de la cápsula que
timeline,
abren
it's,
es esa en donde está este muchacho ahí
since they
adelante.
splashed
Es
down
esa
at
compuerta
11:48,
que se alcanza a ver, esta compuerta de aquí.
AM Pacific.
Esa compuerta. No sé si se alcanza a ver mi cursor. Bueno, pero es la compuerta, esa puertita que está ahí enmarcada.
And so, again,
Gracias,
they're just
Roque, por tus
pausing the
saludos.
operations for a moment,
Andrea
doing
está
some additional
ansiosa,
air
pregunta
sampling,
si la van a abrir ya. Sí, ahora.
around the prop system.
En
We
unos
still
segundos la van a
have,
abrir.
Telemetry being fed from the vehicle, so flight controllers here in Hawthorne able to monitor prop tanks, propulsion tank pressures, and not seeing any issues with those at the moment.
Saludos desde España, Gabriela. La cubierta se abre hacia afuera. La cubierta se abre hacia afuera.
So again, just a short pause in the operations is, again, they're just sniffing around the capsule.
Eso fue una de las
making sure we
grandes
don't have
enseñanzas para la NASA que dejó el trágico accidente del Apolo 1 en 1967. Una escotilla que se abría hacia adentro, los astronautas no pudieron abrirla y murieron. Se incendió la cápsula por dentro y murieron intoxicados. Así que desde esa vez la NASA ya realizó todas sus compuertas hacia afuera. La NASA y obviamente el resto de los países que hicieron naves espaciales aprendieron también de esa lección.
And Dragon SpaceX update, we're still investigating. Looks like we'll be setting up a service section purge. We're working on a ETA for you.
Okay.
Saludos a Nis desde Perú. Desde Miami, Daniel Calderino. Gracias, Daniel.
In case if you're just joining us,
Lugar privilegiado
NASA astronauts
el que
Bob
tenés,
Behnken
Daniel,
and Doug
para
Hurley
poder ir a ver algún
have safely
lanzamiento.
returned from the International Space Station. They made an on-time splashdown in the Gulf
Gracias,
of Mexico,
David,
just off the coast of
por tu saludo.
Pensacola, Florida. At,
Yo soy astrónomo, Mariela.
11:48
Soy astrónomo de la Universidad Nacional de La Plata.
18:48 a.m. Universal Time. And they have been pulled out of the water and hoisted onto the recovery vessel Go Navigator. And right now the team is just completing, they did an initial check and found that there might be some remnant vapors, which we certainly don't want to be around when we have Bob and Doug coming out of the capsule. So the team is working to purge the service section in preparation for crew egress. Just a little commentary on the hatches that we've been talking about. So while Dragon's top hatch is used to connect to the International Space Station, that's the one that's located under the nose cone, which is currently hidden there at the top of the capsule. Before this is the side hatch is what is utilized for ingress and egress, both on the launch pad as well as coming up here on the recovery vessel. When the when the capsule is docked to the International Space Station, they will use the forward hatch to exit and enter the capsule. Something to note that once that side hatch is opened, it'll be the first time that Bob and Doug have gotten a breath of fresh air.
Oscar Vargas de San Luis de
The first
Potosí,
time
México.
they've been able to do so in 2 months since
Saludos.
they boarded the Falcon 9 at the start of their mission back on May 30th.
Yeah, with an on-time splashdown, they return with almost exactly 64 days in space on this mission, just a few minutes shy of that. So I know they're looking forward to it. At a minimum, in a little bit more of a stable condition now that they're on the boat, not in the water. But again, our team's just continuing to step through. They're reporting that they're seeing all of the vapor
Desde
levels
Fort
that they
Lauderdale,
initially
Florida, nos
detected
saluda
have been
Lynn.
dropping, and that service section purge.
Dragon SpaceX, we showed that levels are declining, but are continuing with purge.
Copy.
And in addition, just so you know, we are not seeing any, leak indications or anything like that. These are pretty small levels, but we still need to do the purge at this time.
La siguiente misión a la Estación
Okay, copy. Yeah,
Espacial
to read our mind, Mike, we were just wondering if
Internacional
you've got any
será,
indications of a leak or some
preguntaba
depressurization. It sounds like it's just,
Daniel Aspilicueta de SpaceX será, y de la NASA será en septiembre.
Yeah, that's
Será
a
la
good
primera
lead,
misión ya operativa. Esta fue la primera misión de prueba tripulada. Si no escuchan sonido es porque la NASA ha eliminado el sonido por ahora de la transmisión oficial. De hecho, yo no la estoy escuchando. Saludos de Puerto Rico, Gis. Ahí retomamos
So we're just continuing to get a view down
ahí retomamos el
right
sonido.
at the hatch of the capsule. They are detecting those very small traces of a couple of the hypergalls. The one we've heard specifically mentioned was NDO or NO3 nitrogen or NO2 nitrogen dioxide. They are at very low levels, obviously not at a very harmful level, as we still have people in close proximity to the capsule. They are going through with the purge. They're not seeing any indications of a leak in the service section of Dragon. That's where pretty much all of those different fuel tanks with the hypergalls are located inside the capsule. And we are just about 44 minutes post splashdown, actually still ahead of the timeline, as we weren't expecting to get the hatch open until shortly before 60 minutes, at which point we'd be bringing Bob and Doug out. So this service section.
SpaceX, another update. The service section purge should begin in a bit under 5 minutes. Right now we're showing NTO about 2x of our personnel exposure limits, and we're hoping once we start the purge, it'll drop down for us.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Saludos para Marcela,
And I'm going to have
de
to
parte de
correct
Samuel
myself.
Escobar.
So it's NTO, that's the dinitrogen tetraoxide, and that's one of the hypergolic fuels used inside Dragon for powering those Draco thrusters.
No, no han perdido ninguna llave, ni mucho menos. Simplemente están siguiendo los procedimientos que se necesitan hacer.
So again, the SpaceX engineers detecting levels.
Este proyecto de la NASA es el
NTO,
regreso, Miguel Rinquet, por parte de los Estados Unidos de América al espacio, con astronautas, pero despegando desde Estados Unidos con naves norteamericanas. Esto no ocurría desde el 2011, momento en que el transbordador espacial Atlantis hizo su última misión, julio de 2011. Desde ese momento hasta la actualidad, 9 años, los astronautas norteamericanos volaron al espacio en naves rusas. La NASA les alquilaba literalmente un asiento a los rusos a $90 millones cada vuelo, cada asiento. Por eso esta misión es histórica, porque luego de 9 años Estados Unidos, algo impensado hace un tiempo atrás, hace 9 años que no viajaba al espacio con naves norteamericanas despegando desde el Centro Espacial Kennedy, pero aparte es una nave diseñada, construida y gestionada por una empresa privada. Esto es algo que ocurre por primera vez en toda la historia. Por eso lo histórico de esta misión. De hecho, toda esta gente no es de NASA, esta gente es de SpaceX. Saludos a Marianela y a Fausto desde Perú. Le pasan la clave. No creo que sea con clave, ¿eh? Para mí no es con clave, para mí es con manijas, con cerraduras.
So right now we're getting ready to purge the service section. This is to make sure that the
Saludos a Oliver y
the
Félix,
team is detecting,
de
get
parte de su
flushed
papá,
out,
Fernando, que están mirando la
The
transmisión.
service
Qué
section
lindo.
is not the interior cabin where Bob and Doug are. It's actually the part of the capsule that is outside of
Me hacen
the
reír con los
place where Bob
comentarios,
and
tengo
Doug
que
are. It's
reconocerlo.
external to the cabin, but it's inside the capsule itself. So you can think of it as the
Diego
space
pregunta a
between
Lina, ¿qué tan
the
difícil es
exterior
ser
of
astronauta y
the
participar de una misión
Dragon
así siendo
capsule and the
argentino? Bueno, la
interior
misma
space, where
dificultad que
Bob and Doug are.
presentan
I think the interior pressure vessel
cualquier
is
persona de cualquier país que no sea justamente de los países en donde estas misiones espaciales existen. De hecho, para ser astronauta tenés que ser nacionalizado estadounidense. Digo nacionalizado porque hay muchos astronautas que no nacieron en Estados Unidos, pero que luego se nacionalizaron estadounidenses y pudieron calificar para ser astronauta. Lo mismo con los rusos. Para ser astronauta de Rusia tenés que ser ruso, lo mismo para China y lo mismo para Europa.
Yeah, that service section is where there's a lot of telemetry. It's where there are the prop tanks.
Por supuesto que
and
cada
we're
vez
making
hay
sure
más
that
posibilidades que antes,
get
pero
aerated
sigue
so
siendo
that,
una
lingering
profesión exclusiva, digamos.
are swept away.
Valentina desde Colombia, ¿cómo estás? Saludos.
Higher levels than they want to see.
Tubia Reyes desde Cuba.
Oxide. That's one of the two hypergolic fuels used in Dragon, the other one being
Italiano desde
monomethyl
Miami.
those two fuels, essentially when thrown together, even without an ignition source, will react. That's what makes them hypergolic fuels. Much simpler, more elegant solution used in a lot of.
¿Cuál es la diferencia entre una misión demo y una operativa? Pregunta Luis. Justamente las tareas. En esta misión demo, la idea era probar todos los sistemas de la nave.
Again, we're just standing by.
Más allá de que Behnken y Hurley en la Estación Espacial Internacional a lo largo de 2 meses hicieron muchísimos trabajos. Sin ir más lejos, Robert Behnken hizo 4 caminatas espaciales de 6 horas y media cada una. Realmente algo infernal, 4 caminatas espaciales en 2 meses. Pero el objetivo principal fue controlar todas las funciones de la nave. En la misión operativa ya directamente no se concentran tanto en el funcionamiento de la nave en sí, sino en el trabajo que van a ir a hacer a la Estación Espacial Internacional.
So as I was saying, 2 individuals on your screen there, one with a face mask and what looks like a scuba tank there with some clean breathing air. There might be another crew member with the same personal protective equipment or PPE that will come on deck here. That type of equipment, there we go. That's the kind of equipment that is required in order to perform this purge. Again, the NTO.
Pregunta Miguel, ellos no salieron.
Are toxic. And of course, we want to keep
ellos no salieron de esa nave en el espacio, usaron trajes en el espacio. La nave desde el cono se abre, la tapa de arriba se abre y se conecta a la Estación Espacial Internacional. Y pasan por dentro, sin salir al espacio exterior. Y estuvieron 2 meses en la Estación Espacial Internacional. Luego Robert Behnken se puso un traje espacial para hacer 4 caminatas espaciales con el comandante de la estación, que también es astronauta de la NASA. Christopher Cassidy, Chris Cassidy. Los dos hicieron caminatas espaciales, pero ellos no es que salieron de la nave Dragon. La Dragon se acopló a la Estación Espacial Internacional y pasaron por un túnel. ¿Sí?
So they're just going to continue to monitor those. They're doing a purge, essentially flushing the air around the service section.
Saludos al Instituto Agrícola de Alto Jordán desde Vélez, Santander, en Colombia. Pedro, Pablo, Jerez, Valencia.
Inside the pressure vessel, the section of the Dragon interior where Bob and Doug and their atmosphere exists, they're essentially outside the pressure vessel, but still inside the outer shell of the Dragon spacecraft.
¿Por qué la demora para abrir la puerta? No lo sé, Fernando. No sé los procedimientos que tienen que realizar. Es la primera vez que esta cápsula regresa con seres humanos. No sé al detalle los procedimientos para la apertura de la escotilla. Por supuesto, sí que como todo procedimiento tiene que seguir los pasos. No sé si se les habrá complicado algo en particular o si simplemente este es el procedimiento normal. A medida que vayan habiendo distintas misiones, vamos a ver si esto es normal o no. Tengan en cuenta que es la primera vez que esto se realiza. Más de 1.800 personas conectadas entre ambos canales, el del Planetario de la Universidad de La Plata y el mío en particular, Diego Bagú. Muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos. Es increíble, casi 2.000 personas conectadas para ver esta transmisión histórica, no por la transmisión en sí, sino por la misión, ¿no? Desde ya. Saludos a la familia Velasco en Ecuador.
To this hatch opening. We did hear confirmation that they haven't seen any indication of leaks to the telemetry they're still receiving from the Dragon capsule. And so,
Dragon SpaceX, we're going to purge for 1 more minute.
Le están diciendo, el Capcom, comunicación de SpaceX en California, le están diciendo a los astronautas que esperen 1 minuto más. Así que, listo, están por ahí por abrir. 1 minuto más.
To the hatch opening process.
Bob and Doug will be getting assistance from the recovery teams while exiting Dragon Endeavour. This is the same process for any returning long-duration crew members, as returning to a gravity-rich environment can, be a little jarring, wreak havoc with our vestibular system. So, which is responsible for maintaining balance and motion. Of course, as you've heard us say multiple times earlier, safety is our #1 priority with this operation. So you will see both Bob and Doug helped out of the capsule and assisted to just the few feet over to the medical quarters aboard the boat.
Yeah, if you've ever watched long-duration crews return on a Soyuz, it's pretty similar process where they're literally carried out of the capsule and immediately placed down into a waiting chair where they usually get some initial medical checks out there in the field before they're then carried to an inflated medical tent. We don't have a tent, we have quarters, and they're a whole lot closer, so they'll just have a couple of feet to go from the capsule itself into those medical quarters. And then once they're in there, they'll get some initial checkouts from their flight surgeons who are on location on the boat with them. These are the people that have essentially been responsible for their health and well-being throughout their mission, both beforehand, all of their pre-flight data takes, offering them support in the lead up to launch, and then the entire time while on board the International Space Station. And then they're right here with the front line, with the recovery teams, ready to welcome them home. So it's been just about a minute since we heard that last call to the crew. We should be just about done with the purge. We're going to stand by, and hopefully we'll resume these hatch opening operations.
Pregunta Juanita por la temperatura. No, la temperatura es normal adentro. Lo que puede haber es algún escape de gas, y por eso los astronautas no tienen ningún problema, porque de hecho están hablando con el Capcom, con el centro de control, pero aparte están con trajes. Pero puede haber alguna especie de gas en el interior que se haya escapado, y por eso también los operarios están con sus mascarillas. Pregunta Elizabeth si todos los que estamos aquí creemos que han venido del espacio. Supongo que debe ser una broma o algo por el estilo, el comentario. Vamos a dejarlo en esos términos. Y no entremos en ningún debate, por favor, porque no es un lugar para debatir esas cuestiones sin sentido alguno.
Yeah, which detector, what number, Mike?
Yeah, it'll be detectors 2 and 3 in location 14.
Saludos para la familia González en Chile.
Okay, thanks, Doug.
Dice Bernardo Einstein desde la Patagonia Argentina. Diego, hay una fuga entre la escotilla y la cápsula interna. Gracias, Bernardo. Gracias por el detalle.
Either in the parts per million or the parts per billion, but just as an extra safety precaution, we heard Anil Menon, the authority from SpaceX, on the boat, asking the crew to take out some air detectors that they have inside with them, just to do some quick sampling inside the cabin itself. So again, we've said it before, we'll continue to say it throughout: safety, the top priority with this operation. So the teams are going to be very methodical and make sure that everything is in a good setup, a safe environment, not only for the crew themselves, but also for our recovery forces. But for now, Bob and Doug still inside of the Crew Dragon. We are just 58 minutes post-landing.
SpaceX Dragon with a status.
Preguntan si las naves vienen contaminadas. Me perdí quién había hecho la pregunta, disculpen. Las naves no vienen contaminadas, pero puede haber alguna pérdida, como en los tanques o algo por el estilo. Gracias, Gabriel Barrio Nuevo, por tu super chat.
Okay, great news. 0.0 for detectors 2 and 3 for NO2 and MMH. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Gabriel. Festejando con un capitán del espacio, el alfajor más rico de la Argentina. Saludos para tu madre Estela. Saludos para Crece Guzmán en Panamá, Héctor en Puerto Rico. Mauro Prieto pregunta cuál es la próxima misión en septiembre. En septiembre tenemos la misión operativa número 1.
Dragon SpaceX for a status update.
That's
Okay, so currently our exposure limits are below limits, but the purge is actually doing a pretty good job. We saw NTO go from 3 parts per million down to 1.5 over the last few minutes. So ideally, with a lot of caution, we'd go ahead and let the purge run for a little bit longer, but we want to see how you guys are doing. If you're okay with continuing with the purge versus knock it off and get you guys out of there quickly.
Yeah, we're fine hanging out, Mike. No problem here.
Okay, thanks for that, Doug. We'll keep working the purge to get us down.
Están controlando el tema de los gases, le dicen a los astronautas que está todo bajo control, pero que tienen que asegurarse de que esté todo bien al momento de abrir la escotilla.
Yeah, we concur.
Spacecraft Commander Doug Hurley reporting the crew still doing well in Dragon, so they are good to continue to hang out. Medical authority.
Tengan en cuenta que la nave espacial en todos los laterales tiene motores. Tiene 8 motores Super Draco muy potentes y 16 Draco más pequeños, y todos esos motores funcionan con tanques de combustible que están en la nave. Y eso está entre la cápsula interna y entre la pared interna de la cápsula y la pared externa de la cápsula. Entonces pudo haber algún escape de gas, de combustible, y son combustibles muy tóxicos, por cierto. Entonces, si ellos observan que se mide cierta cantidad de gas nocivo, no van a correr el riesgo hasta tanto no tener todo controlado. Y eso es lo que están controlando. Si ha habido escape de gases, si lo ha habido, en qué cantidad, etc.
But they're just continuing to let these levels dissipate, bring it down to zero, and then we'll resume.
Pregunta Rodrigo, ¿cuál fue la misión que más te marcó en tu vida? Y bueno, la del Apolo 11. La del Apolo 11 no la viví, pero obviamente ese primer alunizaje en julio del 69 realmente es un antes y un después en la historia humana. Saludos a Erwin, Bonet Campo desde Colombia.
So good. It is good to hear that they're doing well still inside the Dragon capsule.
Saludos a José Mijares desde Cuba. Gracias por tu chat. ¿En dónde cayó la cápsula? Pregunta Glot. Cayó en el Golfo de México, en la costa de Pensacola. La cápsula está pensada para que se reutilice. Exactamente. Pregunta de Manu Quilín.
We're good. Just keep doing what you're doing. We can wait the 5. Easy.
All right. Thanks, Doug.
All right, so we'll settle in at least another 5 minutes while they just continue to disperse any trace remnants of those hypergol fuels around the service section of Dragon before we once again step into the hatch opening. We're gonna stay with this until Bob and Doug are out of the capsule and into their medical quarters.
At this point, Bob and Doug are still strapped into their seats. The seats have actuated away from the position where, I guess, in the orientation in which you see the capsule.
Pregunta Juan Manuel Rufa, Diego, ¿qué opinas de los que piensan que no llegamos a la Luna? Pienso en que le faltan el respeto a la inteligencia humana. Saludos desde Chaco, Camila Carballo. Gracias por unirte. ¿Cuáles son los nombres de los tripulantes? Pregunta Viviana López. Son 2, el comandante Douglas Hurley y el piloto Robert Behnken. Ambos veteranos de 2 vuelos espaciales del transbordador espacial. Este es el tercer vuelo al espacio que logran y el honor de ser el primero en un nuevo programa espacial con una nueva nave espacial. De nada, Juan Manuel.
Egress process, getting Bob and Doug out of the capsule.
Están navegando hacia tierra firme, Mario, exactamente. Están navegando hacia la costa de Pensacola, en donde se encuentra la estación de la Fuerza Aérea de los Estados Unidos, una de las bases de la Fuerza Aérea.
Where a NASA plane is going to be standing by to then load them up and bring them home to Ellington Airfield at the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
Pregunta Lucía, ¿es viable el combustible sólido para el descenso de la cápsula? No, el combustible sólido no. Se utiliza combustibles líquidos para las cápsulas una vez que están en órbita. De hecho, también se utiliza combustible líquido para los cohetes. Algunos cohetes tienen aceleradores con combustible sólido, pero no. Una vez en órbita es todo combustible líquido. No es viable.
Okay, sounds good, bud. Thank you.
Han controlado aparentemente la fuga que ha habido. Después, obviamente, con más detalle tendremos los datos, ¿no? Respecto de qué ha pasado, pero se han sacado las mascarillas, así que está todo en orden. 2.000 personas conectadas entre ambos canales, entre el canal del planetario de la Universidad de La Plata y mi canal particular. Muchísimas gracias. No me canso de agradecer que hayan querido compartir con nosotros esta misión histórica realmente. ¿Cuándo creo que volvamos a la Luna? Pregunta José Mijares. En 4 años. En 2024, 2025 estaremos caminando nuevamente en la Luna.
Has to be a feeling of just success, though, for those two. I mean, taking the first flight in a brand new spacecraft, we knew as test pilots, this is something.
Disculpen si por ahí no alcanzo a prestar atención exactamente a lo que están diciendo en algún momento, porque estoy leyendo los comentarios de ustedes y saludarlos de manera de agradecer haber estado aquí. Llevamos más de 3 horas de directo, 3 horas 10 minutos, 12 minutos, y al prestar, tengan en cuenta que esto es muy casero, ¿sí? Más de escuchar, de compartir, de hablar, también estamos manejando el software y compartir, entonces de algunas cosas me pierdo, por supuesto. Saludos de San Luis, Mile y Fausto, de parte de Josefina.
Currently pegged for no earlier than late September.
¿Qué pienso de China y de su programa espacial tripulado? Pregunta Ángel Suárez. Van a ser líderes. Van a ser líderes, Ángel. China y Estados Unidos van a ser los líderes en materia espacial en los próximos años. China va a llegar a la Luna con sus astronautas. En pocos años veremos a astronautas chinos caminando en la Luna. Ellos le llaman taikonautas. Pregunta Pamela si esta cápsula se utilizará para la siguiente misión. No sé si para la siguiente misión, Pamela, no lo sé. Pero obviamente pasará por una serie de chequeos y si aprueba los distintos chequeos, obviamente se reutilizará. Nazarena Vizcaíno, saludos desde La Plata.
They had a sleep period, 8 hours of rest on the capsule on their way home. They've been up since a little bit earlier this morning, wake coming about 4:40 a.m. Pacific, so a little more than 8 hours ago.
Andrea Verónica Aguilotti pregunta en la siguiente misión, van 4 personas, ¿no? Sí, exactamente, van 4 personas, será en septiembre, será la misión operativa número 1. Y la comandante, Arthur Megan, es la esposa de uno de los astronautas que está ahí adentro. La esposa de Robert Behnken. Será la comandante de la próxima misión. O sea que una pareja, un matrimonio, el piloto en la primera misión de prueba es el piloto. Y luego ella, la comandante de la segunda misión. Un honor realmente. Gracias a ustedes, Viviana López, por sumarte con tu esposo. Saludos desde Medellín, Colombia, Raúl Granda Gallego. Desde Sevilla, España, nos saluda Juan Chía. Desde Andalucía, Antonio Ruiz Pérez.
And Dragon SpaceX, we show 0.4 parts per million on NTO, 18 parts per billion of MMH. That's below limits. We are proceeding with hatch opening.
Okay, great news. Thanks, Mike.
All right, so there's the green light we've been waiting for. In fact, the green light we've been waiting for months at this point. This is our first opportunity to say hello to Bob and Doug, our favorite space dads, as they are now about to egress or exit from Dragon Crew Endeavour. Again, this is the culmination of what has been about
Ahora sí, parece que está todo en orden.
Home, all starting yesterday, as they departed the International Space Station. So this hatch will be manually opened, and once doing so, Flight Surgeon Anil Menon will say hello and make sure that they're still doing all right, and then proceed to assist them with exiting.
Ahí la van a abrir. Y ahí va.
And we see the hatch is now open. Hatch being opened at 12:59 p.m. Pacific. Hatch is open.
Qué bueno.
So right now they're going to put a piece of equipment in there that basically smooths out the edges and makes sure that it is a comfortable
Muy
exit
buen mensaje,
from
Hugo.
the Dragon capsule.
Muy
Just a
bueno.
little piece of structure there to ensure that the hatch will remain open and that any sharp edges around that side hatch are protected.
Ahí pusieron una especie de marco para proteger justamente la escotilla, para asegurar la escotilla, mejor dicho. Saludos desde Pamplona, Cúcuta, en Colombia, Juan Aparicio.
And that hatch open coming at 12:59 p.m. Pacific. That's 19:59 Universal Time or GMT.
Y obviamente no se van a perder las fotos como corresponde. Ya entraron los técnicos para ayudarlos. Tengan en cuenta que son 64 meses de estar en gravedad cero, ya que los muchachos tienen de alguna manera los músculos atrofiados. Hay que tener ciertos cuidados de detalle.
So once again, the SpaceX recovery team is now assisting NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley to exit the spacecraft.
Sorry, we got the hatch open just about 2 minutes ago.
Así es, José, 64 días. Despegaron el 30 de mayo, llegaron el 31 de mayo y regresan hoy el 2 de agosto.
And then once those were down back in acceptable limits, we were able.
Como pueden ver, los van a extraer en una camilla. Son 64 días, no de no caminar, 64 días de no trabajar en absolutamente los músculos. Para que tengan una idea, un día en el espacio, en gravedad cero, equivale a estar unos 24 días aproximadamente en cama sin moverse. Un día en el espacio, unos 24 días en cama sin moverse. Ellos estuvieron 64 días en el espacio en gravedad cero. Ese es el motivo por el cual los músculos se atrofian bastante y los huesos también, ¿no? Los huesos en realidad se produce un proceso de descalcificación.
Yeah, as we discussed, the reintroduction to gravity from microgravity can be a bit jarring, especially on our vestibular system, so the stuff responsible for our balance.
Ahí están hablando justamente de las cuestiones de salud, tanto en cuanto a músculos, huesos, como también el aparato circulatorio. Los motores, me piden que repita el nombre de los motores. Los motores son Draco, son 8 grandes y 16, 8 Super Draco y 16 Draco. son los motores que le permiten a la nave controlarse en el espacio. Saludos, Ledis Ortegón. Ya nos mandaste bastantes por lo que veo. Los del Apolo salían dando saltos. ¿Sabes lo que pasa? Los del Apolo estuvieron 6 días en gravedad cero y estos están 64. Es una diferencia muy grande. ¿Cómo se llama este programa espacial de la NASA? Pregunta Damián Gómez. Este programa se llama Commercial Crew, tripulación comercial. Y es un programa en el cual tienen básicamente 2 naves, esta, la Crew Dragon de SpaceX, y la Starliner C-100 de Boeing, pero la Starliner está teniendo bastantes problemas. De hecho, en su primera misión no tripulada de prueba falló, así que hoy por hoy la NASA tiene solamente esta nave para ir al espacio, con astronautas.
Thank you, Bob, for those awesome words. It's absolutely been an honor and a pleasure to work with you from the entire SpaceX team. It's been awesome.
Gracias, José, por sumarte, José Mijares, a vos y a tu familia. Saludos a Adrián Stafaloni.
Some initial words from NASA astronaut Bob Behnken. He's in the pilot seat, so you've heard him refer to himself as PLT.
Pregunta Luis, ¿qué pasa con las necesidades fisiológicas de la tripulación durante el descenso? Los trajes espaciales están preparados tienen una especie de pañales, en caso que necesiten. De todas maneras, antes del descenso van al baño, tienen un baño en la nave, por supuesto. Está todo controlado. Saludos. ¿A quién más? A Damián Gómez. Gracias a vos, Leo, por sumarte, Leo Ríos. 2.048 personas conectadas. Muy lindo, la verdad, poder estar todos juntos compartiendo este momento. Van a retirar al primer tripulante.
Here we have our first view of Doug Hurley.
Ahí va Doug Hurley, el comandante.
My thanks to everybody over the last several years that's either worked in Hawthorne, McGregor, or down at Kennedy Space Center. Anybody who's touched Endeavour, you should take a moment to just cherish this day, especially given all the things that have happened this year. We certainly can't thank you enough. Our families can't thank you enough. And, just proud to be a small part of.
Gracias, Ernesto. Saludos a vos. Dice Gerardi, hay astronautas que han pasado más de 6 meses en el espacio y no salen en camilla. No, Gerardi, no es así. Todos los que viajan por varios meses salen en camilla. Las Soyuz rusas, por ejemplo, en la estepa de Kazajstán, donde caen, tienen unas reposeras y los bajan en reposeras, de hecho, y están un buen tiempo en las reposeras y los llevan. No van caminando, los llevan al micro y van trasladados así hasta el centro espacial. Siempre, nunca caminan. Después de tantos días, nunca caminan.
We got a thumbs up indicating that things are going well. Sorry, excuse me, I mixed up my positions there. Yeah, those words were from Doug, and we have Bob that just came out.
Pregunta Miguel Riquet, ¿qué comen? Básicamente comida deshidratada en la Estación Espacial Internacional, que luego le inyectan agua para hidratarla justamente, y de esa manera tienen comida sin necesidad de llevar muchos litros de agua desde tierra. La Estación Espacial Internacional tiene un sistema de filtrado de agua, de manera de ir continuamente utilizando la misma agua. De hecho, la misma agua, la misma orina que ellos despiden es purificada para luego utilizarla.
To make his way out into the fresh air for the first time in 64 days.
Dice OMG, la cápsula no acabó bien al entrar en la atmósfera. No lo sé, para mí fue normal, pero bueno, puede haber alguna información que yo me he perdido. Luego vendrán obviamente las conferencias de prensa. De hecho, hoy a la tarde ya hay una conferencia de prensa sobre la misión. ¿Cuál fue el tiempo máximo del ser humano en el espacio? Lucía, fue de un doctor ruso, un soviético. Estuvo más de un año. Tuvo algo así como 400 y pico de días. No recuerdo ahora el apellido, el nombre. Como una estadía única, como una estadía prolongada de un solo tirón, digamos, en una sola misión. Después hay astronautas que han estado más de 400 días en distintas misiones. ¿Cómo se hizo la Estación Espacial Internacional? Valentina García, a partir del año 2000, con el envío de distintas naves. Cada nave enviaba un cilindro y esos cilindros se fueron conectando en la órbita terrestre. Hoy en día, esa conexión de cilindros, cada cilindro tendrá el tamaño de un ómnibus aproximadamente. Hoy en día la Estación Espacial Internacional tiene el tamaño de un estadio de fútbol. Ahí sale Robert Behnken, también. Ya lo van a poner en su camilla. Y finalmente esta misión termina más que bien. Misión histórica, por cierto.
Got him seated. And there we go, another thumbs up. We've got some applause here.
Ya están los dos sanos y salvos y el centro de control de SpaceX, felices, no es para menos. Han logrado algo único, literalmente algo único en la historia del vuelo espacial tripulado. Esa dama rubia de pelo largo que está en el primer escritorio al centro es Jane Shotwell, es la gerente de SpaceX, es la mano derecha de Elon Musk. De alguna manera es quien maneja la empresa.
It's been an incredible mission. This all kicked off just 2 months ago on May 30th from Launch Pad 39A at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. We had a successful liftoff. We had to dodge around some weather. It was suspenseful, clearing up the last possible moment. They had a flawless ride to orbit, a 19-hour journey to the International Space Station, where they just spent 62 days on board, 64 total days in space. They were Expedition 63 crew members, doing science experiments, spacewalks, repairs, everything on board the orbiting laboratory.
Their journey home began yesterday when they closed the hatch to Dragon and undocked hours later at 4:35 p.m. Pacific. After 4 successful departure burns and a phasing burn to line up their orbit, Bob and Doug rested up before waking up for a re-entry earlier this morning. We successfully jettisoned Dragon's trunk and performed our final on-orbit maneuver, the deorbit burn, at 10:56 a.m. Pacific to send Dragon on the path home. The spacecraft successfully re-entered the Earth's atmosphere and slowed its descent with successful deployments of 2 drogue parachutes and 4 mains, with the final splashdown occurring off the coast of Pensacola, Florida at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, right on time. Following that successful splashdown, we saw SpaceX recovery experts quickly move in and prepare Dragon Endeavour for its lift onto the recovery vessel. And just a little less than an hour following splashdown, we saw Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley make their way, thumbs up, out of Dragon and into the recovery ship's medical facilities, safe and sound.
Yeah, we just got word that the helicopter itself should be landing soon, so that'll be their next step in their journey. They'll catch a short flight back to shore where they're going to transfer to a waiting NASA plane for another short flight back over to Houston. They're going to be reunited with their families, and that's going to bring an end to this historic flight. It's really been an honor and a privilege to share this journey with all of you as we open up this new era in human space flight. But I mean, just as we close the book on this mission, we're already counting down the days to the next crewed Dragon flight.
Yeah, absolutely. SpaceX and NASA will now begin the process of reviewing data and telemetry from this successful demonstration mission to prepare us for Crew 1, which is currently targeted to launch no earlier than late September. Crew 1 will be SpaceX's first operational flight, flying a full crew of 4 astronauts, including our first from Japan, one of the international partners on the space station. The mission will last approximately 6 months. It has been an incredible honor and joy to share this.
Saludos a Silvina Otero, que hoy es su cumple, 2 de agosto. Feliz cumple, Silvina.
And return this capability to fly humans from America. Continue to follow SpaceX and NASA online and on our social media updates.
Se emocionó la comentarista de SpaceX, está emocionada.
And we're going to continue to share the progress of Bob and Doug's trip back to Houston on social media. We also have a briefing coming up.
¿Qué pasa con Diego? Preguntaba Andrea. Hice una parada técnica. Entré a boxes por unos segundos. Llevamos 3 horas y media de transmisión.
So we're going to say thanks one more time for tuning in, cheering on Bob and
Bueno,
Doug as they return home. And we'll see you
terminamos así la transmisión. Realmente ya están en el barco, están en el Go Navigator de SpaceX, camino a la base en Pensacola. Vamos a cortar aquí para no tener problemas con la NASA. Ahí está. Les quiero agradecer muchísimo, ¿sí? el haber estado ahí. Fueron 3 horas y media y estuvimos con más de 2.000 personas conectadas en un momento. La verdad fue una alegría, es una alegría muy grande. Gracias a todos, de todos los países de América, de España y seguramente algún que otro país más me he perdido. Bueno, fue un día histórico. Regresó finalmente la Crew Dragon Demo 2, o Endeavour, como la bautizaron Hurley y Behnken, sus astronautas. Era la parte más peligrosa de la misión, cuando las naves caen del espacio a la atmósfera terrestre. Es lo más complejo de la misión. Yo creo que es más complejo incluso que el lanzamiento. Hoy comentábamos que en el lanzamiento, si algo anda mal, existe al menos existe la posibilidad de que la cápsula se separe del cohete. Esta cápsula está preparada para ello, pero en el reingreso, una vez que cae en la atmósfera terrestre, no hay vuelta atrás. Es una caída libre y eso corre con un gran riesgo. Pero bueno, salió todo bien. La primera vez que esta nave con tripulación regresaba a la atmósfera, así que todos más que contentos y felices. Nos veremos para las próximas transmisiones. Por lo pronto, si no hay algún intermedio, hacia fines de agosto tendremos la transmisión del lanzamiento del satélite argentino SAOCOM 1B y luego en septiembre ya estaremos con la misión, la primera operativa de la Crew Dragon de NASA y de SpaceX. Muchísimas gracias a todos y, como siempre decimos, por favor, cuídense mucho. Chao, hasta la próxima.
Bob, Doug, on behalf of the entire SpaceX team, it's been a huge honor to help you get ready for today's historic mission. Know that we're with you, have an amazing flight, and enjoy those views of our beautiful planet.
Thanks, Jay. It is absolutely our honor to be part of this huge effort to get the United States back in the launch business. We'll talk to you for more, but thank you.
Nine, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 and Crew Dragon. Go NASA, go SpaceX, Godspeed, Bob and Doug.